Maybe the interim is the intro, the acting. Same thing. I've heard you called lady in waiting. I have. Well, that's probably proper. Yeah. We can start the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, we can start. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 24th regular meeting of the Township of Montclair Planning Board. In accordance with New Jersey statute, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building and by sending a copy to the local paper. This meeting is being broadcast live on Channel 34 and is streaming live and will be available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning we have powers and procedures resembling of court of law, and we're obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide the basis of an official action. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and the decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Please be advised that this is a no-smoking facility. Fire exits are to my right, your left, and the back of the room where you entered. As to the order of the evening, each application hearing begins with the applicant or their attorney giving an overview of the application and the variances that are required. We then hear from any expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain the application and why the variances are needed. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, the attorney, and their expert witnesses. If you are a member of the interested public, but not a witness in the case, you will have 2 opportunities to speak. At the end of each witness's testimony, you will be given the opportunity to ask the witness questions about his or her testimony. That is not the time to tell us what you think of the application, however. To ask questions, you will have to come to the front of the room, give us your name and address, and then ask your questions. After the applicant's witnesses and any objector and objector witnesses have been heard, members of the audience will then have their second opportunity to step forward. At that time, you may express your opinions, positive or negative, about the application. Comments are generally limited to 3 minutes per person. After completion of the applicant's case, the objector's case, if any, and public comment, the public hearing is closed and the board members discuss the case and vote. You will be able to listen to our discussion, but you will not typically be able to participate. And first order of business is roll call.
Chair Wynn is excused. Vice Chair Brodock.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz.
Here.
Mr. Cook is excused. Counselor Schlager.
Here.
Ms. Willis. Here. Mr. Rooney.
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally.
Here.
Ms. Lockman. Here. Mr. Barr.
Here.
Mr. Gilmer.
Here.
Okay.
Before we move into our approval of minutes, if anyone is here for application 2610, which is Platinum Interiors LLC at 96 High Street, it's an application for major subdivision to divide a lot, to create 3 lots. That application is being carried until July 8th. Correct, Janice?
That's correct.
So we will not hear that application tonight. Next up is our minutes from June 10th.
I had one question. So I saw the edits that came through, and thank
Right.
you all for editing there. We don't explicitly note the vote that was taken
Right.
on the ordinance. I mean, did we want to? I just noticed it
Right.
last minute, so yeah.
I did get that comment, and I can add the vote that was taken.
I don't know if we want to. This truly is an open question of whether we need any more than the board being supportive.
Well, I think that we need to clarify what was voted on,
Right.
because I think there's been some discussion as to whether or not the vote was that the ordinance is consistent with the master plan, or that the ordinance is consistent with the master plan if it's revised to reflect the planning board's comments. That was my understanding.
Actually, that point is what had me go back and recognize that the specific language wasn't in there, and so
Right. It wasn't in the minutes.
So my understanding from the discussion was that we voted that it was consistent with the master plan, but still voted we were making amended changes to be done this evening.
We said it's consistent with the spirit of the master plan.
I think
Okay.
we'll have to then look to the actual resolution put forth.
But just to be clear, if nothing changed in the current writing, we are saying that that is consistent with the master plan, but there's ways in which it could be improved.
Just to clarify, there's no resolution. It wasn't
Or
a
sorry, in the,
resolution.
right, proposed.
This is really just
Recommendation. But we haven't even made the recommendation.
Right, right, which was what I tried to do is, separate from the minutes, is that I put it in the report, which I know we'll discuss once we approve the minutes. So anyway, maybe we should save that discussion for the report.
So do we want to discuss the minutes now or hold those?
Well, do we
for
want to
now?
have the vote in the minutes?
Yes,
I mean, I would
it's a
think so.
basic element that I think should be
Yeah.
included.
Okay.
I mean, it's just, it's
Then-
So
so
I'd
easy.
like to resolve this before we vote.
That's
Then-
fine.
then
I
what
think
was
that's
the
good.
vote, that it was
Yeah.
consistent with the
Notwithstanding the fact we were deciding on what we voted on.
Right.
It doesn't really matter.
I mean, no one really knows for sure.
Well, there
do
was
we?
a lot of
So-
discussion.
There
Remember,
was a lot of
There was a lot of
discussion. Yeah,
discussion,
yeah.
and I think it was that it was consistent with the master plan, but that you had all
Subject to the changes
subject
that
to all
we-
these changes.
Then that's very different.
Yeah, it is very different. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I don't think it, my recollection is that it was not subject to. My recollection is that you voted that it was consistent with the master plan, but in the report to the governing body, you wanted to express some additional points with regard to the way the ordinance was written and the way it would be applied. That's my recollection.
That was my recollection as well.
Okay.
Same here.
I would like to say, though, doesn't it make sense if we get a copy of the ordinance to expedite the process, is to include our comments within the ordinance so that we can talk about the proposed language, not just, here's what we think we want to do, but why don't we put it in the ordinance and then we can discuss the actual
Because
language?
the ordinance has already been introduced. The council would have to reintroduce it. I think
But then how do our comments get incorporated?
We
They would
have
have
to-
to change,
they
edit the
will or they
ordinance,
won't. The
right?
council
Right.
decides
Yeah.
whether or
Council.
not they want to do that.
We have to make
That's why the point of what we voted
Ah.
matters so much.
Okay,
They're
yeah,
getting-
because I misunderstood that. I thought that we could look at the ordinance, incorporate our changes within the ordinance.
You're not crafting the ordinance.
We have to
Yeah.
make conceptual points
Gotcha.
that the council then either takes, accepts, uses, doesn't, modifies, whatever.
Right. It seems to me, though, to assist the council, it's always helpful, maybe you give them a second draft. Here's where we'd like to see our changes, you put it in there, it's already in there. And it's a helpful way for them to see where our comments fit in. I mean, now I understand that that's not the way it goes, but,
That would be if the council's attorney was amenable to edits, line edits with an interested body or constituencies. And to date, that doesn't appear to be the case.
Well,
So-
no,
Unless-
there's no, I don't know. It's not going to be for vote to the council until July. So I haven't seen any revisions. I don't even believe that they've started working on those revisions because they're waiting for the report from the planning board and the report from the HPC and the report from the zoning board before because they're getting all these reports, and then I believe that the council, Ira, is going to make the changes and the recommendations to the council after he receives those reports.
so he won't change the ordinance, though, until he has a discussion with the council, is that correct? Because you're saying you have to reintroduce it a second time as the
I
same
don't know
thing.
how he's going to proceed.
No, I'm just wondering procedurally, how does it work?
I
Yeah.
don't know. It's up to
Ah.
him.
Oh, it's up to him.
But Arthur,
Yeah.
that is the point of what we voted on, was to say, if it's not in accordance with the master plan,
Right.
that would have Ira, Mr. Karasik.
My recollection isn't that we said it was not in support of the master plan.
Put your mic.
Mike
Oh,
on.
I'm sorry.
Put it down too.
I think the word intent of the master plan would be basically what we said, and that it was, that the idea of doing it was in support, compatible with the intent of the master plan. We just needed to make certain the corrections to it, and that's basically what I hear around the table is what we said.
But those corrections are not needed for it to be in the spirit of the master plan. It's in the spirit of the master plan, word for word, how it is now. Is that?
It's in the intent, within the intent of the master plan.
Yeah. So,
Consistent-
and that's the
consistent
is
point,
the
and
word.
that's what,
Right.
consistent with the master plan. But
Consistent.
that's the point, Mr. Karasik would be more likely to hear our recommendations,
Yeah.
were we not to have voted that it's already consistent with the
Here,
master plan.
if you go to the minutes on the bottom of the first page, that first paragraph says, most board members were satisfied with the intent of the proposed ordinance. And then I can insert there, and found that it is, the ordinance is consistent with the intent of the master plan. But we're concerned about the procedures, which
Yeah,
I think
that's
is
basically
valid.
it. That would do it. That would do it. Thank you.
Once again, I have a question. So I went through and I looked at the ordinance and I made edits, but I'm not supposed to be doing that. Is that what you're telling me?
Right,
Right, okay.
right.
For the future, I will not look at the documents and edit them, no matter what.
You can look through it, but you know,
Depends on whose document.
I
If
have
it's a
the feeling
council
you
drafted
can't help
document.
yourself, Carmel.
I didn't hear you. Say
I
that
said,
again.
I have the feeling you can't help
I
yourself.
can't help myself.
And then I'll add the vote, which I have written down, who voted in favor and who voted opposed to it.
Yeah. I have a question for you. Were there other comments besides Keith's that were circulated? Because I don't think I saw any other comments on the minutes.
That was the only one.
Okay. I thought, Dan, you had said there were other comments. But
No, I
okay.
just noticed when I was trying to distinguish this point, we
Right.
hadn't had that color in there,
Right, right.
but everything else looked good.
So is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay.
Next up is the council referral for the demolition review ordinance.
Which is good. I do think we made progress actually on this already. So the point that I raised in my edits, in addition to Carmel's and Keith's, I think that first bullet point just comes out about
Are you on the draft memo?
it being inconsistent with the master plan. Right. So I think we can strike that.
Strike that.
Okay, let me make sure I have the version that you're working from.
Oh, yes.
Is this the version that you sent to me?
It
Send to
went to everyone.
You
I
sent
got it today.
It came from you.
Yes,
So
correct.
under the scope?
It's the first bullet point under our recommendations. second
Oh, Okay.
page. I'm just hoping it avoids any additional discussion if we just say that comes out.
Where was this again?
On page 2, the first bullet.
Gotcha.
May I ask a question? This is to Dan, since we were sort of aligned on the original. Are you satisfied that in these additional blue areas that are shaded, that are in the master plan, it says that you've got to essentially, all the blue areas which are being added by the ordinance are recommended for formal study. So is what we are putting forth going to recommend, so that it's consistent with the master plan, that we recommend before the ordinance is adopted that more formal study be undertaken in these areas? Because that would be consistent with the master plan. Because on page, it's right after 105, all those blue areas that have been consumed into the new ordinance, right in the key it says recommended for formal survey.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they hadn't been.
I'm just asking Dan if he, sorry. Have you thought about that? or-
Yeah, so I had thought about that. The challenge that I'm struggling with here is that as a board, we've already said that word for word it's consistent with the master plan, but could be improved. But the way that we have it framed now, my biggest concern is that the master plan says we should protect resources. It doesn't say that we should protect all zones with potential historic resources. And that's a dramatic difference. And so those zones need to be studied to identify specific resources that would be covered in the ordinance. So exactly like you're saying, that's exactly what should be done. That's what we should recommend.
Do you think that the memo as you last edited is consistent with that?
So I believe there was a line in making sure that those zones were revisited and
Okay.
specific resources identified.
Thanks.
Right.
I completely disagree with that position because I believe those zones have been studied. And my suggestion is that we bring up a former HPC chair to discuss the particulars of how these areas were incorporated into the HP element, what was done in the past, and why, while further study may be needed to designate them as locally historic protected properties for the purposes of this demolition ordinance, which is essentially a light demo zone, already have sufficient designation. And I think that kind of clarification from Mr. Smith, who has been the former HPC chair and is the council's redevelopment consultant, would help clarify for board members what had gone in the past, because that's what people seem to be struggling
Well,
with.
I think my question is that there was a working group that was identified in the historic preservation element that did the survey. I don't know if Ira Smith was part of that. Were you part of that working group? Okay. That was my only question. It identifies who was part of the working group and who studied that area, or all those areas. Some of them were studied and some of them were not.
So
That's why,
why don't we have Mr. Smith and Mr. Greenbaum or somebody else from the HPC come up and get into a little bit of the particulars of this as a process, so we can hear what was and what wasn't, and what was included in the designation, so we can make some intelligent decision. That would be my suggestion, to take a couple of minutes of expert discussion to hear that, so we can make an intelligent vote.
Well, let me just bring up a point first. I thought the reason why this demolition ordinance exists is because while I think we all, well, maybe not we all, but there's some agreement that more study should be done, that the HPC was resource limited in doing that additional study.
Right, so
So-
it was a resource limited study.
No, I mean, even going beyond what's in the HB element, is that, I think the HPC has had this desire to go through and try to identify more properties that might be designated as landmarks, but just hasn't had the resources to do so.
Right, no.
I think this year that we were going to take one specific area and do the research, but it's a very small area.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly as a test thing to see if we can actually work it through, because this would actually be our first residential area.
you're actually doing 2 this year.
We're doing 2.
You're doing 2.
Okay.
We got a grant, and we're studying 2. We hired a consultant. This summer, they'll be doing the analysis of those 2 study areas. So, yeah.
But since, unlike Glen Ridge, which has designated entire swaths of the town, we have yet to designate residential districts. So again, I suggest we hear from people who know a little more specifics now, so we can understand what went into being on this now wider list to start with, which, as agreed, is being placed in effect because we can't individually designate all those properties and go through them. And so this is a protective mechanism to prevent demolition when something shouldn't slip through the cracks, but could if nothing was in place. So again, I make a motion to bring up Mr. Smith and somebody from the HPC now for a couple of minutes, just to review the particulars of this, so that board members can make an intelligent decision about this particular recommendation.
I think it's a reasonable idea, but we have to do it in resolution form just to get it done.
You mean, do we need
I
a
think it's a
formal
little
motion?
strong. Yeah, I mean, can't we
Well,
just have some,
They're right here?
yeah. I'm not.
Motion was made.
Yeah, well, okay, well, I'll second it then.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, all in
I-
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Stayed.
Okay.
So, well, let me just understand, what is the exact question? And because maybe I don't fully understand this, what is the exact question you want one of these
What
gentlemen to?
What procedures went into being placed on the list of properties that are being included within this demolition ordinance? And there are various ones. There are the locally designated properties, the properties on state and federal registers, and the properties that are within the proposed historic districts.
But,
I
so
think
I don't, if we could just cut straight to the proposed historic districts, I
That's what we
think.
were talking about.
Yeah, that's what we
Yeah.
care most
That's what we
about.
were-
and
I wanna
that was what
streamline
we-
It's
that's what we were talking about.
3,276 properties.
Where'd you get that number from?
Janice.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Graham gave me
Graham
the number. He has
counted
those numbers.
And it's,
Whoever's in the HPC here should come up. Come
Come on
up.
up.
Caroline too. Whoever.
but I just want to make sure we rein this in a bit to focus on
I
those
think we just want to
proposed.
get.
Yeah, I don't think we need everybody showing.
I think that
Yeah.
we can get it.
I understand where some of the confusion lies.
And is your mic on?
Hello, testing.
And would you please state your name for the record, Ira?
Ira Smith. Are we on?
Yes.
So I heard Mr. Gilmer ask about really the definition of what does it mean when the master plan says protect historic resources. The municipal land use law, which is a state law, has a series of actions that are prescribed, which run through the Historic Preservation Commission, that can result in the local designation of a single property or neighborhood. And the surveys that have been done in the past were prelude to subsequently more intensive levels of survey, which may result in finally a residential district, for example, being locally designated.
Yes. Are these zones locally designated?
They are not.
And is
They
there
are-
a process for that?
There's a process.
A community outreach and public notice process.
There's a
And that's
multi-step
what
process.
we as the board are trying to understand now, if that process was abided by, because now these zones are being included in this ordinance.
Oh, those steps were absolutely abided by. During my time, 10 years on the HPC, I saw the expansion of the Town Center Historic Business District, the Pine Street Historic District, and the Upper Montclair Business District. And it does happen in stages that seem painfully slow, but there is initially a survey done, all of which, Janice just referred to. There's multiple steps that include community outreach, but also an initial survey to
And
sort
public
of...
notice.
Public notices, that's absolutely right. Public meetings, hearings, and it results in a nomination report. That's
And-
the ultimate document that the commission will then vote on. But
And
it
I
doesn't
just-
end there, it then goes to the council.
Just one question. The property owners are individually notified,
Property owners are supposed to be
Right.
individually notified.
just so that the board is aware of the
Yeah, it's a very
process.
carefully described, prescribed methodology. So the master plan doesn't say all that, meaning it really just says, we're saying to ourselves as a town, we are going to protect historic resources, and the applicable laws are implied, and that begins
But
with
when
the
you
state
mentioned the
law.
municipal land use law, the notice requirement for zoning changes and for designation, the municipal land use law does require notice of
Absolutely.
individual properties.
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
For
It's-
instance,
it's a very transparent, prescribed methodology. Yeah.
And notice was given to the 3,276 properties.
No.
included.
For the earliest stages, you don't want to bug people, so you kind of go out and say, well, is this even an area worthy of further investigation? So that's really just getting a base level background of, is there something here that might be worthy of further study? Like these studies that Planner Talley and Member Rooney talked about, the two studies, the HPC's finally had the time and ability to earn the grants dollars to underwrite this more intensive level of study to see if those neighborhoods might be worthy of nomination as locally designated historic districts.
Ira, weren't those districts, weren't they considered for designation when the HPC was first created in the 90s?
I wasn't as involved. I've heard that the residential districts were put forward as, should this be what we try to designate locally, because historically, I think the residential districts earned recognition by the state and federal
Right.
levels before our business districts.
They
So
did.
it seemed like, well, let's start with what other officials have already identified as important historic resources.
But that didn't move ahead.
Did not move ahead, from what I
for instance,
understand.
the Marlboro district, when the Marlboro Inn was up for demolition, I know this for, I was involved in that. More than 50% of the homeowners in that district voted or signed a document saying that they wanted to locally designate the Marlboro area as a historic district. The council at the time did not vote on that, but the homeowners within that area had agreed, or enough homeowners per the statute, had agreed to designate their own area as such. So it's an accumulation. In some cases, the state and federal entities designated these districts. In some cases, locally, they had been designated or noted for designation. It's not like somebody's picking it out of the air. And to my colleague, Tony, I respectfully have to disagree with his comment last week that he believed 80% of the properties do not warrant. I think that's just completely wrong. Most of the properties do warrant designation.
How can we say that?
Because they've been included in this district. They may not warrant the standards for full local designation as a landmark, but certainly for this level of status protection, which is an interim step, it's clear that district should be included, and that's what the council is essentially saying here. So,
But
anyway.
they're being included in an ordinance to protect historic resources without being designated as historic resources.
Well, protection doesn't mean designation. Protection, in my mind, simply refers to recognizing there's a process prescribed by the MLUL that could lead to ever greater levels of protection. I mean, they're sort of saying as a community, these are nice buildings to have around, and then ultimately, as you go up each level of the stair, at the top it's actually locally designated and requires, any changes would require review and approval by the Historic Preservation Commission.
But it's not at the highest level, but it's being subjected to that review.
It's
So that's
not-
what I'm just...
It's not being subjected to. It's
If
being
you want the
subjected
full
to-
residential demolition, it is subjected to review of the application, including an archaeological study and everything else the ordinance.
It's being prevented from immediately being knocked down, so it can be looked at. It's a stopgap to prevent immediate demolition, so that because there is indication that it should or could fall into that category, with the recognition, as the chair said, that we don't have enough resources to individually designate each building right now, and so it's creating a stopgap demolition step.
You know, if I could, Mr. Gilmer's right. He's right in that these properties are being subject to that level of review, but I would argue, because, as I understand it under the ordinance, only properties that are within these previously recognized historic districts would be flagged. You're kind of accelerating like an individual nomination.
Right.
And at any time,
yes,
actually,
so that I see.
Yeah.
And that-
Yeah, but actually, it's a lot more than just the ones that are within local and, designated local and federal districts.
it's
It's a lot more new ones
It's a lot more new ones.
that are right. That's the,
main point of
the
contention
point
that
of
Mr.
contention
Gilmer has
is
held
the-
from the very beginning.
I have the number.
I'm
the
not worried about the federal,
3,276.
state, and locally designated. It's
So
the
is it-
3,276 covered over 4 days, which again, check my math, it's around 30 seconds per resource.
But you could argue that the previous surveys were incomplete because lack of time or manpower, which I believe was the case, and that you're creating an opportunity for the HPC on a spot-by-spot basis as people submit an application to consider whether the property does rise to the occasion of being locally designated.
Which I am very sympathetic to because I actually appreciate that more targeted approach. The only 2 points with that are, one, and we'll get to this in a moment perhaps, but why these specific zones? Why was one block chosen, not another block? There needs to be some verifiable standard that was applied even in selecting these zones that have potentially historic resources, one. Secondly, it seems to go against the spirit of the municipal land use law in that it's a way to have applicants go through a process without actually being designated. So it's saying you're not designated, it's not that you will be classified as a historic resource, but hey, you might be, so we're going to stop you to check your ID again at the door kind of thing.
On your second point,
am I in, am I not in? Yeah.
That the MLUL already has that condition built into it. there are 3 agencies in Montclair that lawfully could designate or pursue the nomination of any historic property at
Right.
any given time. The HPC is one, the council's another, and I believe the Montclair Historic
Yes.
Center is the third. I'm not sure if the planning board's
do.
designated or
Plan-
not.
it's
Maybe the
4.
planning board as well.
Really?
So the specter, if you will, of being examined, evaluated at any point is kind of already allowed. So I don't think it's a reinterpretation or an erosion of MLUL.
But that gets back to my
standards.
initial point in terms of why you're putting I don't even know what to call
that-
these zones.
What you're talking.
And there's also
can I-
notice
It's a light
involved.
Can I help there?
preservation zone.
But I think from
Okay,
what I
I'd like
gathered
to.
at the last meeting,
Yeah.
was the discussion of due process and notice.
Right.
This is what
That's
And-
what's
That's true.
different.
Due process, notice, and arbitrary lines, the arbitrary
Yeah.
aspect
Because-
to it.
Because once you go through that process, then property owners are noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
And
not
given an
saying, I'm
opportunity.
not saying there's never,
Right,
you know,
with-
there's,
with that- and I think
noticing.
from
But
what I heard,
property owners
that-
aren't given notice that you might be given
Right.
notice. It's like, I'm really struggling with
Property
these
owners aren't given notice.
3,276. And again, the federally, state, and locally designated makes sense. The other crazy part of this is the inspiration came from a couple of structures which we've lost that were actually on the junior league list and would be included without including these potential zones that were identified over 4 days. And again, the biggest concern with all of this is that we have an ordinance in place that ultimately creates such friction. It sets back a lot of the objectives that we're looking to get toward.
yeah, I hear you.
And I just don't see how everyone on all sides doesn't see that as a risk in that. So, yeah.
Property
I'll stop
owners
there.
aren't given notice when a zoning law changes that impacts their setback. They're not given individual notice. It's published in the paper.
They are, if there is a zone change.
Of course, they're told, they're given notice at that time. Well, they're going to get the same notice from this proposed ordinance.
No, they're not.
They
No,
are.
I think that
No,
was our
they're not.
concern.
We keep saying
We-
this.
There's no notice for
There's
this.
not a notice provision.
Well, that's what I
Well, I
added.
think that's one of the things we
No,
object.
but that's what you added after you've already told them that this is in accordance, or.
Then
how
you
do
gotta
we-
notice all those property owners before this is introduced, or before the second reading.
Yeah, I would support the importance of
Procedurally.
Well, this is
noticing.
what I think we were trying to say
impacted
in our
parties.
notes
They should be
about what the
noticed.
concerns were.
Okay.
They would pay attention to our recommendations if we didn't already vote, that we find it to be, what's the exact wording with the master plan?
But consistent with
Consistent,
the,
yes,
but consistent with the master plan and having a notice issue are not, there's no dichotomy there. One's procedural, the other
Right.
is conceptual. That-
No,
and
I
that's-
know, but they didn't ask us for the procedures of this. They asked
Well, that's
us
what we
this-
offered.
Well, we're,
Well, by law, they asked us whether we
So
felt
That's
that the
exactly
board was
what we offered
consistent
in
with
I
our
the
guess it
master
goes
plan.
back to,
Our
I think,
recommendations.
what we voted on at the last meeting is that the board felt that the ordinance is consistent with the intent of the master plan, but falls short on the procedures
Right.
with particular consideration to due process and transparency.
That's exactly
And
what
that
I
all the
said.
property
That's
owners
what
that
we
are
cited as the main
affected
issue.
should be noticed
Right.
to be consistent with the municipal.
And I
land
found
use
those
law.
issues to be so egregious that they were inconsistent with the master plan, because one of the
Right.
objectives for historic preservation is public support and notice. I forget the exact wording, but it's very clear that.
again,
yeah.
when the town passes a zoning ordinance change, if it's impacting you, you get notice, but they're not given notice beforehand when the council is considering the concept of doing so. If it impacts them, they get it.
They're noticed at the public hearing.
Exactly. They're
Or
noticed
prior to the,
prior
10
to
days
the-
before the public hearing.
Right. So notice and placing, one of the things that I put into my proposed edits is that, this clearly goes onto the property cards,
Right.
and that the homeowners are noticed about this.
Yeah, sorry, engagement of the public in preservation activities, but, yeah. And again, 4 days
I'm sorry
presented
to
at
add
one meeting.
a little more confusion
Yeah.
to this, but here's the master plan element with the map. And the map has light blue areas and dark blue areas. The dark blue areas say not recommended for formal survey, which I interpret as we studied, but we're not recommending it.
Right.
The lighter blue areas have recommended for formal survey. When I look at these zones, despite the different colors, And right now, I'm on the Historic Inventory Viewer, all those purple areas online, they're all designated the same with no differences against this map. So there is a lot of confusion about the 3,000, now is it 2,000? So I think that there's a lot more homework that needs to be done to allow all these private homeowners with property rights, we at least owe them some due diligence to say, are you in or are you not?
Because the map should be cleaned up, without a doubt.
Well,
No, but that's also in the master plan. 8.2, protection of property owners' investments and strengthening of property values through careful, and, you know, it goes on. But yes, it's clearly part of the master plan. These aren't words these are words that were written in the objectives, goals and objectives of historic
I
preservation.
mean, it sounds, so just to summarize real quickly here, I mean, it seems like we're all on board with there needs to be notice. That's one of the key things that we're saying here as a board.
In the current ordinance,
Right, and so that's a recommendation. The public be noticed before this ordinance is enacted,
Okay.
right? I think where we're struggling right now, and let me just get this thought out, where we're struggling now with what is the right number of properties or the right list of properties to be included.
right.
You know, the ordinance has a very specific list. Ms. Talley suggested in her memo a few different ideas. Mr. Ian Wally's got a list that he's looking at. You know, I think where we're struggling here is what's the right list of properties to include in this light preservation district? And I think that's probably where we should focus.
And that's actually why
And Mr. Greenbaum, if you could just state your
Yeah,
name
my
for the
name is
record.
David Greenbaum. I'm a member of the Historic Preservation Commission, resident of Montclair, New Jersey. I wanted just to be able to clarify a little bit about what sounds to me, to your point, Keith, the confusion about what is or what are the proposed historic districts. And this is the universe of properties that are residing within the districts that have been identified by the Historic Preservation Commission in association with a third-party professional audit that had been done. In fact, there was a working committee, and I believe members of the planning board were actively involved, including Carmel. Just to help you understand what these proposed districts are, just to kind of clear up some misunderstanding. These are districts
Oh,
that...
excuse me, just because we've bounced around so much.
Yeah.
How many resources are affected in the districts that you're describing to us now?
I can quantify
And not
it.
the exact number. Is it there's historic, so locally designated historic sites and districts, 390 resources.
Right.
So may I ask you, are you comfortable with those 390 districts being subject to this particular ordinance?
So,
District. Not
Or properties.
the resources that you are presently designated with a formal stature, not proposed, but ones that actually have official accreditation.
all the ones that have
Accreditation.
an official status,
Yes.
I believe everyone is fine with. So I
Okay.
just wanted
So
to,
that's why I'm here, because I'm here to help you understand exactly this kind of, this ambiguity here. What is the proposed districts? And what we did, just to help you understand the process, as we all know, Montclair is many sub-communities within the town. And they developed at different times. There was a natural development of the community in each area. As the train came in, as new commercial areas evolved, et cetera. And what we did, our working group, is we broke down and identified areas that had certain commonality, that were bound by certain streets and districts that had a certain continuity, architectural consistency, kind of a cohesion that we recognized constituted a unique and special community within the pool of communities in Montclair. And to address the goal of that was that's the first stage for us to then go forward to start individually going through each particular proposed district and then identifying in a little more rigorous way specific properties that may warrant a higher level of accreditation. But there also is something to be said for the kind of the unity and the cohesion of a particular neighborhood and a particular streetscape. So for example, South Mountain Avenue has a particular gestalt that perhaps is worthy of being recognized as unique. the Norwood district between Park Street and Valley Road, between Bellevue and Alexander. That area constitutes a certain cohesive time of development. The area of Greenview, Fairway, Belgrove, around the Yanticott Brook area, which was the former golf course of Montclair, that area identified as a unique area. So what we did is we identified these areas with the intent of viewing each one in the future as resources were made available. And to address what Mr. Rooney was suggesting before, there are presently 2 districts that have been identified that are already being funded for full review. That would be the Wheeler Street District and the Oakcroft District.
When you say full review, could you define that, please?
I believe Janice can confirm this. I believe there's been a grant. Janice, has there been a grant?
Well, I just want to be clear. When you say full review, you mean to designate them locally. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We
I
got a
just
grant, and we're
wanted
doing 2
everybody
of
to be
them,
clear
2
about that.
areas.
So, to address the issue, what we're doing is a sequential process based upon, limited capacity and limited resources. But the point is there is an agenda and there is a vision to go through and identify areas that are worthy of recognition. And so the question, and I can answer this for you or for the law, okay, and I do recognize that this does create a conundrum, because if it's not officially designated, then of course it goes into a gray area. I recognize that. I don't know enough about what a proposed district means, but the spirit and intent of these proposed districts is consistent with what we would call the designated districts. We're moving in that direction.
So you mean the spirit of the identified proposed districts?
Yes.
Have already been identified based on some criteria, and have you used the national standards as some of the basis for that criteria? Have you used the
Yes.
criteria for designation, which is already applied to locally designated districts?
Yes, we
in
had
making your evaluation?
We had a third-party expert company that specializes in historic district and actually kind of parsing through and kind of curating. And these are people who aren't from Montclair. We guided them by first identifying what we felt to be districts that were unique, distinct from one another, but yet of a certain particular time and merit and cohesion. And as we've finished our kind of breaking down into the subsets of each district, then what we did is we assigned a third-party company to do the full and thorough analysis. And if you look upon the documents, I believe in the HPC element, each area is specifically outlined with a summary as to the unique features, qualities, et cetera, which I believe adhere to the National Historic,
And
language.
beautifully so. The element, there's no issue with that. And the sites that have been identified. The one point is just understanding why these sites are identified, or zones are identified versus other areas of the town. Because there are a couple of these zones that have no official historic resources in them. And there's many zones that have historic resources that are not circumscribed as having potentially historic resources. So I'm simply trying to understand the...
How do you know that? What criteria have you made?
I'm just looking at the pink, so
In
there's
other words, hold on.
nothing there.
David just told you that a working group of historic preservation-oriented people with a certified expert in designated locally designated properties reviewed the entire township and came up with a initial compilation of districts.
I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying, though. I'm saying there's 3 of these that I'm just seeing looking on the page, where you see the zone has nothing that's officially designated.
You mean it has no buildings that have
Specific
been
properties.
said,
Yeah.
this is on the national...
And then there's many
Yeah.
that have,
Yeah.
and again, just coming at this naive, I'm looking at why the lines are drawn on the map as they are drawn to
Okay.
distinguish how this is not somewhat arbitrary.
Okay, so
So-
here's the answer to that question to the best of my knowledge. Okay, there was a thorough, thoughtful adjudication of the evaluation of each district based on a variety of features and criteria. So your issue that you've identified is that this particular district that's been proposed as a designated area does not have specific identified properties within that district. However, what we're endeavoring to do is to recognize the district in its entirety, and therefore, in my mind, and I'm not an expert on this, what we're doing now is we're creating a first-tier line of defense, so that if a property within one of these districts is considering and seeking demolition or a substantial modification that would just basically effectively be a demolition, we want to, I believe the intention is to provide a process by which that demolition is reviewed thoughtfully with the intent of making sure it's a good decision for the benefit of the community. And so by keeping it within these districts, we're not saying that they can't be demolished. We're saying that these homes, because they are within these particular cohesive, architecturally unique districts, deserve that extra level of review. And that's all. And I don't think
So that's very helpful with these zones. And specifically, why would you not choose the areas that are not part of these zones?
I can't specifically address the ones that you're thinking of. I don't know what you're thinking of.
The entire town.
I think what people try, the
Because I'm getting at the arbitrary aspect here, and I'm not saying that it's arbitrary, I'm just not understanding it not being arbitrary. And so I'm asking someone that was part of the committee to tell me why it wouldn't be. And if this is more of a targeted approach, I do appreciate
Real
that.
quick about these areas that don't have any designations. They were built after 1950. And we never did any designations before. Like this one down over here, everything is 1950. This one over here is 1964.
Can I just add a point? I'm Caroline Kane-Levy from the HPC, and I'm sort of disappointed that Ira Karasek isn't here to talk, talk to you as he did at
Well, he was
our
at the
meeting.
last meeting, Caroline.
Oh,
He
okay.
He did have
did
an
the
extensive
presentation.
discussion with the planning board at the last meeting.
All right, well, I
And he
think
stayed for
you're
a bit of
concerned
time,
about,
so yeah.
it sounds like what I'm hearing is that you're concerned about regulation of these buildings that are not designated. But what I understand, this ordinance is not about regulating whether people can change their windows or their shingles or do an addition. It's about complete and total demolition. And he was very careful about defining that. We spent a lot of time going over what that means. So we certainly, on the HPC, do not have the resources to review every change to a building in a non-designated historic district. That's not our intent. It's just to identify buildings that are being proposed for demolition and to have a moment to review it and see whether they're worthy of protecting further.
And I think we're on board with that. I mean, at the last meeting, we talked a lot about what is this ordinance really trying to do. I think where we're all struggling here is what list of properties should it apply to? Because as written, the ordinance is very broad and it says, let's see, a historic structure shall include any property in a historic zoning district or on a historic site designated on the zoning or official map or identified as historic or potentially historic in the historic preservation element or any component element of the master plan. So I think we're struggling a little bit with how broad that is.
And if it's a broad ordinance, then have it apply broadly to the entire town. I'm trying to understand the
I think that was our concern. Your point is very well taken, Dan. I understand, and you're doing exactly the right thing. You're asking exactly the right questions, and I don't have any issue with the questions you're asking. I do want you to appreciate, though, that when we talk about this one group, which happens to be a large group, which are the potential historic districts, okay, that's the area that seems to me the area of ambiguity, so or the area of question.
Right.
So there's 2 points I would like to make about that, just to reiterate. One is these are areas that were sifted through and really thought through by a variety of very specific tangible, identifiable criteria. So there was a active process to define these areas. It's not arbitrary, okay? So I know that's your concern. Now, obviously, within each district, there are going to be exceptions. There are homes within each district that are inconsistent. From in the past, things have taken place that we can't go back. However, but we recognize that these areas have enough merit for a variety of reasons that are very tangible and broken down. And because of that, we just want to, I think the premise is to give those areas that one extra step forward. So imagine if somebody moves in from community out in Nassau County, Long Island, never lived in Montclair before, they just got transferred and they buy a house. They don't have a feel for the town, they don't have a sense of kind of the vibe, the gestalt, the whole experience. And yet, people come to this town, I argue, it's not the trains, it's not just the schools, it's not just the mountain. There's an aesthetic quality to this town, whether people articulate
absolutely.
it, whether people
person,
can identify
yes.
it or not, it's there, and it's a very important one. But sometimes people miss that.
And even folks that can't articulate it feel it as soon as they are in town.
Absolutely. So the point I want to get at is that, so then that person who comes in from Nassau County, who might have grown up in Levittown, who doesn't have a sense of what Montclair represents. Okay?
Do you have someone in mind?
I'm using experience. I'm using experience.
Right near there.
Okay, well, but that person might come here and not, so what that person might make decisions that ultimately might be detrimental to the streetscape and the community. That
That's
maybe
true,
even in the
yes.
future they'll regret. What we're saying is that these areas need to be held up and say, this area was built in 1920 to 1929. The homes are predominantly Tudor or of a particular material, slate roofs, et cetera, et cetera. So if somebody wants to walk in and decides to build a prefab, imagine somebody wants to build a home made out of freight containers, 40-foot freight containers, intersecting, okay? It's a very, you could see magazines about this. What if somebody wanted to do that on Greenview? I think that would.
Well, that's a good point, because let me, Greenway's in the fairway, right?
Greenview, yes.
Okay, so here's the fairway. This goes back to my inventory question. That's not the big blob here. Here's the report. It's not recommended for further study. It says the reason why it's not recommended is that it has low integrity, lack of cohesion, high level of intrusions, lack of architectural identity, absence of historic context.
Greenview? And Fairway?
Fairway.
Fairway Association?
Fairway area. I'm reading the report. This is what we're subject to. We read this stuff and we
moved that
see.
district.
Which
Well,
report are you
here's the
reading?
master plan. I'm just looking at, you want
There's
to,
an error.
well, but that is my,
That was
that
a
is my.
specific area we designated.
What page
Well,
of the, what-
you can read the report, it's BCA is the consultant, right? So they said it's not recommended, so we're looking at these
It's an
great.
error.
Wow.
Well, I don't know.
I just think we have.
It's their formal report. You can see it. You can see what's checked off. So when we review this stuff, back to the inventory, is it 3,000? And there are many other, the Applegate Farm area is another area which they didn't recommend.
Right.
It had some cohesion
Yes,
because
it
of
did.
The
Fill area.
fairway is in the potential. Fairway, Greenwell, Belgrove consists primarily of single, there's a whole description of it.
where?
On the map.
On the map, right. The map says it, but the actual report says no.
That's strange.
And
Maybe that was a preliminary report. I don't know.
Yeah,
That was a
what do
final
we
report.
have
Well,
in the
it's
historic
this
preservation
doesn't look
element?
preliminary. It's about 200 pages, and it's called the Historic Preservation Element of the Township Master Plan from August of 2016.
There's going to be some.
Well, we have to-
I think we need to
correct errors in there. Actually.
Wow.
There's going to be some errors. There's
we
going
should
to be
correct
some
the errors as
mistakes.
well.
But the enemy
Well,
of
that's
the
a huge
enemy
area,
of
and that's
the
a huge
good
mistake.
is the
Can I,
perfect.
rather than go there, I was just wondering if we could sort of
Was it included?
go to our board is sending a list of concerns to the council.
Yes.
And if we look at page 2 of that report to the council, and we look at the things that are list the board's concerns, I would like us to go over that list and see what we have talked about that needs to be added to that list, because I hear a lot of discussion about the things we have already expressed our concern about. So one of the first things on the list is, while it is understood that demolition review is part of locally designated historic sites and districts, that we're concerned that notice has not been given to the other property owners who are affected by the new requirements, and this is not in keeping with due process requirements established by municipal law.
Right.
In other words, we really don't want to let this go forward without having a process by which people can respond to it.
Right, so there should be better notice.
Right,
Full
okay.
notice. That's
Second
my-
point.
This,
The historic significance of many of these properties affected by this ordinance has not been established. That's a concern we've already identified. And many of the properties in the proposed historic districts identified in the historic preservation element of the master plan are not historic and require further study to determine if they are historically
I disagree
significant.
with that position.
Well,
that's
that's one
a
of the,
position.
but that
That's a
point.
position two people
But the board
took.
does not agree with you, and therefore what the recommendation of the majority of the board is the one we're sending forward.
But that's not the case. The board voted 7-2 that it
Right, the
was.
7, I'm referring to the 7. What right now I'm reading is what the 7 agreed to, and that is that historic significance of many of the properties affected by this ordinance has not been established.
No, that was a concern expressed by some, and we just heard evidence from, not evidence, we just heard a discussion how those properties came to, that they did use criteria, that it wasn't arbitrary.
Well, we didn't say it was arbitrary.
Well-
There's nothing in what we are saying to the council that says that we felt it was arbitrary. The historic significance of many of the properties affected by this ordinance has not been established.
I don't
Many
agree
of
with
the
that line.
property,
Let
well,
her
you
finish,
don't
let
agree,
her
but 7
finish.
people did.
If you finish the sentence, all it says is that, and it comes straight from the plan. The plan says that they should be studied further.
Yeah,
That's the
and I'm
sentence.
getting to that. What I'm trying to do is to read what we agreed to as a board, because we as a board, we're concerned about the same things that are under discussion right now. We put it into writing to the council, and what we're doing is recovering ground that the board has come to some consensus of agreeing that
But
there is a
Carol,
concern.
I disagree with you. We
Well,
didn't say many of the properties had been. We said, we discussed that potentially some properties may not fall into
I think the word "many" did come up, but if you wanted to edit something, I didn't get
Some.
But, you know, Carol, you're actually not looking at the most recent edited version, because then we actually go through and put a number. There are 3,000 plus number of properties that are.
But the point is still the same.
It is the same, but we
I'm
flesh
looking
it
at
out a
what's
little
typed
bit.
here, yeah.
Yeah,
You
you're
just
not
say
looking at the most
the number,
edited.
3,276, and get rid of many.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
then
you
we'll
have
put
the
the
exact
number.
But on that point, we can't say it's 3,276. I just pointed out a very significant error. What is the number? I don't think it's,
Well,
This is what's published. You were going from working papers. And
this is a working paper?
this is it.
So the fairway was included?
It's in here.
Yes,
Yeah,
The final version.
this is the final version.
yes, it's very specific. I remember, because I grew up in that neighborhood, so I was able to
Yeah, and
articulate and
there's
really
two different-
distinguish.
There's Fairway Greenview and Fairway.
So they're
Hill.
recommended for formal,
Yeah.
despite the consultant's report, which is in here, which they checked off, very actively, they checked off. Okay.
There must have been
This is
discussion
what we
about
did.
it.
It might have been
Yeah.
prior to their full evaluation, and we helped them,
No,
helped
this is what we adopted.
Listen, we didn't do the review here. We didn't sit on not everybody sat on the committee that took the national standard criteria and applied it. We're not in that position to make those determinations. We're sitting here saying, we live in neighborhoods, not on the prairie, and we're recommending that the council implement a no-demo law that in effect errs on the side of protection, not a total free market, anybody can do whatever they want today. That's the difference of philosophy. We're having a stopgap.
I'm not disagreeing with the need to have our
Yeah,
properties
this board agrees
evaluated.
with
I don't
that.
think the board did,
No,
and that's
we
why
all
we
agree.
said that what we're doing in terms of trying to identify properties and keep them from being demolished is in keeping with the intent of the master plan. But we also listed our concerns, and among those concerns is the fact that there are properties on the list that need more clarification, and if we're going to do that, that people should be given notice and given a chance to speak about it. So these are all concerns that you're raising now, but we've already raised them, and we have written our concerns down as to go to the board. And I think it was pointed out earlier that we're not going to get to actually write the township's ordinance
Correct.
for them, but we can point out to them our concerns. And I think we did that, and I don't hear a concern yet that hasn't been at least identified by this board as to be sent to the council for their to be a part of their deliberations and a part of the public notice and all the things that we're talking about.
Without a doubt, public notice should
So I
definitely
believe
be
that all
provided.
of those things are here, and so I'm not quite sure why we're in the
I think-
kind of circle we're going in tonight.
I think, Ms. Willis, we were trying to see if we can come up with a recommendation to the council for a specific set of items, but I
Right,
think
that's what I'm
after...
saying. What I'd like to hear is what we're trying to get, I'm
Well-
trying to get to what is different from what we've already had here.
I
And
think-
add the sentence, and if there are some errors, they certainly would need to be corrected.
Well, and I think after, an hour of discussion, I don't think we're going to get there as a board to really figure out this is the specific list, so I'm comfortable.
We have a deadline.
Well, no, and
Well,
I'm
I
not trying to
think
push
tonight
this
is-
off to another night. I realize we have to have this tonight.
But we also
But I
have
think-
on our list, I want to go through this.
Well,
We
but-
have on our list on page 2, more
Ms.
objective
Willis, can I-
criteria should be provided.
Let me just finish this one thought on that bullet. Yes, I think this bullet wraps up as good as we're going to get tonight.
Right.
And Ms. Lockman made some edits as well on this and
And I'm
changed the
sorry, I was
language.
using the one that I picked up on the table instead of one that's tucked away deeply.
Carol, let me help you here, because that memo I sent around deals with exactly these points. For instance, the evaluation of significance. The ordinance should identify the actual citation of the National Register evaluation criteria for deciding whether a property qualifies as a historic property, and there is already criteria designated for this, and that criteria should be placed right into the ordinance. Otherwise, we face potentially lawsuits of arbitrary and capricious decisions. So,
And
there'll-
that's noted exactly in the edited version of this
Right.
report to the
So this is what I'm
council,
trying
so
to get to, and I
we don't need to
apologize
talk
for
about
not having
anymore.
that, what is
Yeah.
I pulled up at the moment. But I'm saying we have done this work, and it's been, and if there's something in this that needs editing, that seems to be where the attention belongs, rather than the kind of hash that we're going through on things that are already set.
For instance, there's already established guidance for architectural surveys developed by the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. There are standards for that already.
Okay.
And those specifics should be placed into the ordinance. There are a number of specific things already done. We don't have to reinvent the wheel that could go into that. So I think what I tried to do is, in keeping with the memo that Janice wrote, is to put a little meat on the bone of some of the specifics that could go into the ordinance.
And that's the part of the discussion I think that is worthwhile.
And that's what I
that's
looked at
exactly
the
what Ms.
ordinance and
Lockman
I
did.
made
Yeah.
changes,
Right.
but
And-
I think it's
that's
in there.
next.
I think Carmel, your
Yeah.
your reference, usually they're incorporated by reference.
Mhm.
not-
Yes,
Because
yeah.
sometimes the standards change, and then
Right.
we can't change our ordinance to change the standards. So if you reference them, I
That's
think that's fine, and I think it's a very good recommendation that's in here.
Oh, that's what I'm
Yeah.
looking for. I'm
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
for
I
putting
think-
in the recommendations
I don't
as
think we're
opposed
going
to.
to,
Okay,
Right.
so like the qualifications of the HPC officer, there is a specific designation for that.
Right, and I put that in the
Yeah.
changes that I put in the ordinance.
We've got that.
Quite honestly,
Okay,
yeah,
so,
we've got.
and it just shouldn't be somebody who's a historian, archaeologist.
No,
Right.
it's very specific, and we
professional-
noted that,
We
yes.
have
that.
professional standards.
we have that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the list we should be sending.
Okay, so
Add the things to the list that
Mr.
need
Schwartz?
adding.
Well, I think we're pretty much in agreement with the list. I mean,
Yes.
the item, so
I'm just trying to, I'm trying to
can we
clarify.
wrap this?
Yes, we could.
Okay, back to this language. This says the 2016 historic preservation element, the BCA, was put forth, and it gives the rationale for including these. That's what I have a copy of, so I think we need to do more homework before we issue a report to get everything tighter. I don't know what else to say.
We don't
I
need to
think
do
We don't have,
that.
we don't have
I don't
time,
think we do.
We don't
unfortunately.
need to do that. We just need to tell.
But I'm saying the very memo that we're debating is citing this report, which evidently I didn't know. I looked up this because I was reading this memo. I said, what's the resource? The 2016 report. That's what I went to. It did go
Is that the
to,
final?
I guess not.
We're
based
not
on
going
what I
to
just
correct
learned.
that,
So this,
Tony.
what?
We're not going to correct that. All we have to do is to say, adopt this and make corrections
Well-
where they need to be made. That's what I'm saying. The enemy of the good is the perfect. We can't say, oh, don't do anything, because there may be some errors in that report.
I just want to, I'm going to step back and go back to my seat. I just want to say three things very quickly, and then I'm going to step aside.
We're getting close to wrapping this up.
Yeah.
Can I make my points? And
I mean, I think the board
No, it
is
sounds
comfortable
good.
with what's in our recommendations already. I'm not sure we need any other input.
And I think, Tony, if
Okay.
I make
I'm not saying it's not
change-
valuable, I just think
Well,
everyone's
I
I
heard.
think there's a discrepancy between, I don't know where you got that report.
Well,
But
It
there's-
started, here's the
I'm referring
rationale.
to the one that was adopted.
We're looking at a memo that's going to go to council. I read the memo, it says 2016, I go to that, I look at that, and I'm confused. So I'm just
Actually,
saying, let's
Tony,
make it.
initially I had in there adopted, I think, in November of 2016, but then I thought, oh my God, this is really getting a bit too much, so I took out the actual version of the HB element, and maybe I should have left that in there
I think if we
to
put that
eliminate
in there,
confusion.
We'll
Yeah.
identify the resource, because it is an adopted document.
Yeah, it
You
was-
might have had a previous version, and
Right.
we as the
I have the
planning board
version
and the
that's cited in the
township-
very memo that we're putting forth
You
to
don't know
council.
that unless it's adopted as of
We do
November
have to
2016.
And it may have changed between the version that you had and what was actually adopted by this board. And we have to rely on the document that was adopted by this board.
Adopted November 2016 is what I have.
One.
So,
I don't
Okay,
know.
can I just say one more thing? It seems to me that I don't have before me right now, because I didn't have my smart little machine, I've got only what's typed. But if we have all the corrections that were made by Carmel and various people, and put those in bullet form, rather than as a dictation of what somebody should write, we put the content, the concepts in bullet form, and we're sure that all of those recommendations are here in what we send forward, I think that would be satisfactory, would it not?
I'm comfortable with it.
So I'd like to...
So why don't we just make sure that all of the recommendations that we've heard here, which are to shore it up a little bit, that we get that in the version that goes forward, because I think we have time to
Well, my
write it for
suggestion
them.
is, I can take the version, the latest version, that has some of,
Dan's
that came from Daniel's, except for the one about the inconsistent with the master plan.
Yeah, as it is written, we are saying it is consistent with the master plan.
And I'll put today's date on it, and following today's meeting, I'll distribute it to everybody following this meeting, and if within 2 days, if you can give me whatever comments, I'll make sure that we get one that I think.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I spent a good amount of time writing up a memo with particulars to go in.
But we're not, I don't think we're voting, I think we're voting on the version,
You mean your report?
the one that I got
The
from
report.
Carmel
The
and
report.
Daniel.
Right,
I think
right.
it already incorporates a lot of
It
what you
does,
said.
yeah.
It's
I
already
looked
in
at what you
there.
said,
Yeah,
and
Mr.
it
Chairman.
does,
That you
yeah.
have said that is not in there,
Yes,
Martin,
there
could you
is.
just send it forward tomorrow to...
No, don't send it forward, include it in the report.
I'm
because
saying
why
you send
should
it
someone
forward to
else-
her to put into
I
the report.
Well,
wanna-
he should do it, because then he's the one who should write it, so that, you're not looking at what you think he's saying. Why don't you just edit the report, and then everybody can look at what your edits are.
I don't want to make the edits like that.
It's very hard to read
Because
when you
the-
send a separate email with all your points and,
I understand.
multiple pages.
I
It's much
understand.
easier if you edit the actual document.
Okay. I potentially do that. I want to just bring up those points here so that the people are aware of them. One of the...
Quickly, please.
I will. One of the elements of concern is there is a way to avoid demolition by transformation, so kind of creeping transformation, and or demolition by neglect. And that's of concern as the ordinance is written. Now, again, you can't perfect everything, but someone could, through plans, slowly but surely, completely, effectively demolish a building. I will try to finesse that into the copy with these points, okay? I'll try and stick in the particulars into the
I
report
think
so you can see.
what you're saying, Martin, is you want to change the definition of demolition.
Expanded, not necessarily change it. There,
So, I mean, expanding it is changing it. If somebody alters one wall.
no, that's,
Or
that's,
takes down, I mean, this happens all the time, they take down one wall.
Right.
That's not, they're demolishing one wall, they're not demolishing.
I'm not talking
the
about that. I'm
entire
talking about, I'm talking about taking down virtually the entire building and calling it a renovation, and it's not a demolition.
When it comes
That
to
happens
our
all the
office,
time.
Inside you.
if it's,
That's
No,
what
outside
that
too.
is.
if it's more than 50% of the walls are taken down, we consider that a demolition.
Good, okay.
Okay, so if you want to put
So
that
we're
in the
covered.
ordinance,
No,
we
no,
can try that, but that's,
I think that kind of articulation is
and
fine.
in fact, what
Somebody
we've
had
been
the
trying
point
to
here?
do is
Wait.
we've been trying to get the architects, when they bring in their building
close this
plans,
Yeah.
they have to give us the calculation of the square footage of the
Right.
building facade that's remaining, what's being taken down. So I think we can address that.
Okay.
And Martin, I went through your email, and I have I'll give this to you. I showed where it jives with what our report was.
Good. Well, why don't we have a chat and see if we can't just edit the thing and get some of these points in. Okay, good.
Yeah, there's just one other edit that's going to be confusing when people read it around the teardowns, because we've just said over and over again that 2 occur per year. So
Those are actually demolitions. Yeah, complete tear downs.
right. So that there's only 16 teardowns of freestanding structures on residential properties.
Of homes, for residential homes. It's not the garages.
Okay, and I might be wrong on this, so let's
You're talking about
address
the note,
this now.
the note to the planning board?
Yeah.
Mr. Karasik was very clear that this applies not to residences only, correct? This applies to any freestanding structure on the property. So I just think it's important for us to be clear about that, because the message has always been, you know, there's only been 16 residential demolitions in the last 8 years, so about 2 per year. But that doesn't account for all of the activity that is covered under this ordinance. Because any freestanding structure on a property within any of these 4,000, however many resources. So, you know, a shed, carport.
He did talk
any of
about
those,
that,
right?
like there could be a
Well,
historic
practically
garage or something.
Yeah,
He
'cause-
mentioned that,
So I just don't wanna- 'cause
outhouses.
initially, we had wording
Yeah.
about it's negligible because there's only a couple of these tear downs in Montclair. So, and we don't really know the number of all of these freestanding structures that will be affected.
Let me tell you, this all gets filtered through the building office, the building department. If somebody's tearing down a structure that has no foundations and no footings, generally they're not getting a building permit. If they have to tear down a structure that has a foundation or footings, technically that's when a permit from the building department is required. So if you have a shed that's on just on slabs of wood, not any kind of permanent footing or anything, then there's no building permit that's required to take that down. Garages would definitely be included, though.
Right, so just thinking about full residential demolitions, it expands beyond that, so
Yeah.
I don't know, yeah, so that was just the only other point that I think we weren't very clear on the scope of the ordinance, even in our discussion with Mr. Karasik, so I just wanted to make sure we all understood that, and we can go ahead and edit now. But-
Okay.
All right. With
Any
that,
other
I would.
comments?
Hmm?
Any other comments?
No.
Do you want me to include, I mean, the notes
we
to
need
the
to-
board, the note to the
we
planning
need
board
to
on
move to
page
approve
3?
this?
Do you want me to remove that?
Yeah, I think that shouldn't be in there. right?
Okay, that was
Yeah.
really just for you. I'm
Yeah,
taking-
that was
yeah,
just for
take-
us.
I'm
take
taking
note
that
from the
out.
board.
Oh, yeah, that was to
Yeah.
the planning board.
So
yeah.
we're
And those maps will
approving-
not go to the council.
We're approving your report subject to additional edits that then are going to be reviewed post facto to the meeting and then
Well, I need to get
Maybe-
your comments by Wednesday, I would
Maybe
say.
I'll just clarify that. So, Ms. Lockman, myself, Mr. Gilmer, we all submitted comments on this document.
Right.
I think that's the version that we're approving tonight. With the addition of that, we're noting that the historic preservation element was adopted November 2016, and then Ms. Talley's going to put all of that into, or
Or that-
basically accept the edits.
Yeah, that there's a later version of this, which I think for consistency.
That's it. That's the final was November
But, okay, but this version doesn't have the fairway. The new one that Steve just showed me has a fairway. So you need the
We're-
new
That's
one
the
if you want
historic,
to.
is that the
I think we're
historic
going
thing?
with whatever was adopted.
Yes.
The most recent version that was
It's
adopted.
Steve's, not
Then-
this.
then
And
that's what we
the-
need to
If there's
go
any
by.
errors, they
Okay,
need
and that
correction. and
should
we'll
match
correct
And
what's
I think that's
online.
another issue.
Right.
Did you download that online?
I saved it, believe it or not. I throw everything out, but I saved this.
Oh, okay.
And so we are approving that, and Mr. Schwartz, Ms. Talley's going to accept all those edits, and then just recirculate to the board if there's any
That's
final
what we need.
comments. You know, any
2
minor
days.
detail, I'm not talking major edits, like, you know, anything that we haven't discussed tonight, and that goes for everybody. Then that, if there's minor grammatical things, we're going to make those edits within 2 days, and then Ms. Talley's going to forward it on to the council.
That
Good?
sounds like a plan.
Great. We're going on to the next.
I just want to understand, did you get the HPC's review?
No,
They don't get that.
We don't get.
I haven't received
No, that
the-
goes to the council.
Goes to the council.
Did this woman have a question? Yes. Can you
first 10 minutes said that the business of High Street is not going to be.
That's been postponed to July 8th.
Well, High Street, that property comes over to Mission Road.
Yeah,
Right.
So that's not going to be.
right, that,
Delayed.
Correct.
right, they asked for a postponement until July 8th.
I don't
Okay.
know why I didn't say Mission Road also. But thank you.
Sorry.
Next is another council referral, Ordinance 19-020, amending referrals to the HPC.
This is a very simple change to the zoning ordinance. It actually originated with the HPC. The HPC has been very, very busy with long agendas and late meetings, and they'd like to clarify that, and this was all created by the adoption of that master plan element that triggered the sending of every application that affects those properties to the HPC. Well, there's development applications that don't involve any physical change or to the appearance of the building or the house. And so this basically officially does not require the sending of those applications to the HPC. So, because it's a change to the zoning ordinance, what needs to get referred to the planning board for consistency with the master plan. And I think it's really an effort to streamline and keep the important applications before the HPC and not the ones that they really have no ability to influence.
And I assume this is supported by the HPC?
Yes. Okay.
Does anybody
I only
have?
had one comment, just for clarity. I thought the way the heading of the document read was a little skewed. So I would change that, Janice, if you want to consider that.
The heading of
The ordinance, has that been introduced yet?
It's been introduced.
Huh? Forget it then.
Sorry. That's out of my control.
Yeah.
So, can I have a motion that the planning board supports ordinance 09, or finds ordinance 019-020 consistent with the master plan?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Okay. Next up, we have application 2608, GaRE Venture Montclair Bloom LLC, 467, 469 Bloomfield Ave. Why don't we take a short break before we get to that? But if you want to get set up and ready, we'll be back in about 5-10 minutes. Great.
Thank you. We do not.
I see your point. I mean, I do see your point.
We do not have any.
I see your point.
Oh, yeah, it's just that there's no resource.
process.
Welcome back.
They can, this one does not process. When you say,
Okay, next up on our agenda is application 2608, GaRE Venture Montclair Bloom, 467, 469 Bloomfield Avenue.
Do you have a little bell up there? Is there a bell under there? Yeah, you can usually ring the bell.
I just go right in. People get the idea sooner or later.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Gould. I'm with the law firm of Clark Gould and Attorneys at Law, right here at 20 Church Street, Suite 15 in Montclair. Tonight I'm representing the applicants, which are 469 Bloomfield LLC and GaRE Venture Montclair Bloomfield LLC. This involves the Hampton House building. Pretty apt discussion about historical buildings, following up your prior discussion, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It's for preliminary and final site plan, major site plan approval for the Hampton House building located at 469 Bloomfield Avenue. That's block 3201, lot 1. It's in the C3 Central Business Zone. Tonight we have two witnesses on behalf of the applicant, the architect, who will walk through the plans that were submitted to the board, as well as a professional planner who will provide testimony regarding two variances that the applicant is seeking. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the application and some of the details, and then we'll call Mr. Manning, the architect, to testify.
Just quick question. Did you say it was in the C3 zone?
It is.
Yes.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
Yes, it is. So, as we all know, the building has been home to the Hampton, or was home to the Hampton House Furniture Store for at least 7 decades, and operated by members of the Fish family. That store officially closed in late 2017, at which time the applicant purchased the building in about October of 2017, closed on the purchase of the building with the Fish family. Since that time, the building's largely been vacant, with a couple of first floor tenants or pop-up tenants, the Halloween store during the Halloween holiday. There's a retail pop-up tenant that's currently at the location. This application is really necessitated by the fact that the building has been home to a single retail tenant for 70 years approximately, and there's been very little improvements that the prior owner made to the building over that period of time. As an example, the original elevator from the 1940s or 50s is the same elevator still in the building. So in short, we need to upgrade and modernize the building, make it ADA accessible to current standards, and also make it usable for multiple tenants, since a single tenant use like the Hampton House unfortunately just doesn't really exist in today's modern retail world. So the application is for an 853 approximately square foot addition on the second and third floor of the buildings. That addition or infill will house a new ADA accessible elevator, mechanical equipment, and ADA accessible bathrooms for the second and third floor of the building. So if you look at a cutout of the building, and I handed out, we'll mark this as P1. It's a 2-page, 11 by 17 exhibit prepared by the planner, John McDonough's office.
Yeah.
Mr. Goulden, can we
Yes.
interrupt you for just one moment?
Sure.
And Ms. Talley would like to place on the record the exhibits that have been previously marked as a result of the submission.
Sure.
A1 is the application. A2 is the certification of taxes paid. A3 is the proof of publication. A4 is the affidavit of service. Let me get the most recent plans here. Okay, yeah, A5 is the architectural plan set entitled Renovations of 467, 469 Bloomfield Avenue, prepared by Joseph Mariak, with a revision date of May 30th, 2019. A6 is the report from Suburban Consulting Engineers dated April 2nd. A7, and I gotta get the HPC report, is the report from the Historic Preservation Commission dated April 25th, 2019. And A8 is the report from the Planning Department dated June 11th, 2019. So that would make this A9.
A9, Okay. Thank you, Ms. Talley. So A9, what we've just marked, if you look at page 2, I think is the best angle to really visualize what's going on here with this application. This is a photograph from the north side or rear of the Hampton House building looking, if you're looking at this view, North Fulton Ave would be to your right. So the application is to fill in this gap. You can see that exists on the second and third floor of the building to the neighboring building to the left, which is 467 Bloomfield Avenue. So that would be the infill that would house the new ADA accessible bathrooms and elevator.
It would be flush to what's there now?
It would be, yes.
No, it's actually set back.
Well,
Setback?
10 feet, so there's no
Okay.
rear yard setback
Right.
issue.
Okay,
But
and
it
this
would
is,
be flush on this side.
mhm.
East side. On the east
Okay.
side, correct.
And this is the view, this is Sushi Hana restaurant here, this red building? Okay.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, is it flush to the red building, not Sushi Hana, the other one?
It is flush with the neighbor building,
This.
which is 460.
This, and there's windows there, so it'll cover up those windows that are on that building?
Well, it's already flush to that building here.
We're looking at this, right?
Correct. So you're looking at the back view from this angle.
Yeah.
So the building is already flush towards the side on the Bloomfield Avenue side.
Yeah, but at the little
Then it
infill
juts out
area.
here.
Yeah.
The neighbor, there is a fire escape that currently exists out of that building onto this roof. We've already gone through a permitting process with the town to relocate that fire escape to the other side of the building.
Right.
If you look in that photograph, you can still probably see
You
that
can see the fire escape,
but
yeah.
that's going to be removed. We've already gone through the fire department process to get that moved here.
Right, but I'm asking specifically about the windows there. So what you're infilling will cover up the windows in that red building.
There is no.
It looks like there's
Yeah,
windows.
I
If I'm
think
looking
there's
at-
two windows.
There's a door.
A door?
There's
A door?
to the fire escape.
Those are doors to the fire escape. We're not covering up any windows.
Those are doors to the fire escape. Okay.
Really? Oh, okay.
I was there.
Oh, you don't have that. I looked, but I couldn't get up there. How'd you get up there?
Yeah, so my understanding is there are no windows. There is a fire escape door coming out of that building, which is probably what you see in that photograph.
Okay. Yeah.
That comes to a fire escape landing, and it goes down to this flat, what is a flat roof now on the first floor. You exit out the rear of the building. That still exists in that photograph taken, I think, today, but we do have a second fire escape that's been relocated that now provides fire escape exit from 465. It's been approved and built. So this will
Oh,
be
it's been approved and built?
correct.
Okay.
With the cooperation of the
Yeah.
neighbors.
Since your initial presentation to the Development Review Committee, has there been any substantive change to the plans or modifications?
There has been substantive modifications based on recommendations of the Historic Preservation Committee.
Commission, yeah.
Commission, I'm sorry, which I was going to get into in your.
Just for you interrupted you.
Okay, so I think we've all been oriented. The height of the addition in that area is going to be 40 feet 8 inches, which is less than 10%. And just to give you an idea of perspective, the existing top of the building, the Hampton House building in the corner of the Bloomfield Avenue is 55 feet. So this infill in that back area of the building really is not visible even from the naked eye, from the Bloomfield Avenue side or North Fulton Avenue side, unless really from this angle is where you would actually see it. And again, it's significantly lower than the existing height of the existing building.
Is it the same height as the red building with the fire escape that we're talking about? Or is it higher?
Maybe Mr. Manning can address that.
I think we probably need to have him sworn in.
Yeah, why don't you,
That's it.
why don't you have him testify to these things?
Okay. Well then, if I could just go over a couple summary things and have him testify,
Sure.
or you can address that.
We should stop interrupting you.
So, we are requesting 2 variances in connection with this application. One is for the height. It's 37 feet in the C3 zone on the ordinance. As I said, it's 40 feet 8 inches, which we'll hear from the architect on that, less than 10%. The other variance we're seeking is for an internally illuminated sign This is a recommendation from the Historic Preservation Commission. They want to replicate the Hampton House sign that we're all familiar with on the Bloomfield and North Fulton sides. So that internally illuminated sign is the other variance that we're seeking with the endorsement of the HPC. And then finally, Ms. Talley had noted in her memo that she marked as A8 that permission is required from the township for this new ADA accessible entrance, which is shown on sheet L1 of the plans. So this is North Fulton Avenue. The architect will testify about this ramp that goes into a ADA accessible entrance. This is in the right-of-way of the township, so we are going to require an easement or a license from the township. I've been working with Joe Angelo on that, and that would be discussed a condition of approval if the board were act favorably on the application. So with that background, I think we can now introduce Mr. Manning, the architect. I'm going to swear him in.
Sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Would you please state your business, full name and business affiliation for the record?
My name is Daniel Manning. I'm a licensed architect, and I'm representing the developers of this project, 469 Bloomfield Drive. I've been a licensed architect for 33 years and an owner of my own firm for 30 of those years. I have been recognized as an architectural expert by many municipal planning boards as well as court of laws.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'd submit Mr. Manning as an expert in the field of architecture.
We'll accept him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Manning, if you could just walk through the plans.
Members of the board, 469 Bloomfield Ave is located at the northeast corner of North Fullerton Avenue and Bloomfield Avenue. The parcel is approximately 42 by 80 feet, and the first floor of Bloomfield Ave occupies 100% of the footprint of the site. The second and third floor, as you can see in the shaded area, are inset, and the purpose of the addition is to infill this inset area while complying with the required rear yard setback of 10 feet on the northern property line. This new infill addition would entail construction of a new addition on the second and third floor and would contain a new accessible new elevator which would access all the floors of the building, handicap accessible bathrooms, a secondary exit stairway, mechanical room, and on the roof would be the placement of HVAC rooftop units which would be encapsulated by 48-inch high aluminum mechanical screening. On the perimeter of the building, there will be a new commercial accessible entrance on the southeast corner of Bloomfield Ave. The existing ground entrance that's on the intersection of Bloomfield and North Fullerton will remain, and then a secondary entrance on North Fullerton would be added. Because of the topography and the slope of the site, the entrance would require the installation of a handicapped ramp, which would provide accessibility to the entrance on the Fullerton on the west side of the building. There's a blow-up of that entrance here, which would illustrate that the ramp would need to create 10 inches of increased height in order to provide an accessible entrance. From there will be new interior stairs, which will access the first floor and would go down and access the lower level tenant.
Sir, for the benefit of board members, could you define or describe any other modifications to the facade of the building on either the Bloomfield side or the North Fullerton side?
Yes, sir.
Other than this ramp
Yes, sir.
as proposed?
Yes.
And is this the exhibit you're using? Is this the plan set that we have?
The May 30th revision date,
Yes,
after
use
our
the
meeting
blow-up
with
of this file.
HPC.
Okay.
Okay. Again, this is the entrance on North Fullerton. the new bathrooms, the new elevator, and then this is the new stair that will be accessed from Bloomfield.
So, sir, I just want to be, you can go into the inside of the building shortly.
I just wanted to preface what the entrances we're doing.
Other than the entrance and the ramp, which you've added at the north corner of the building, is there any other facade modification on either North Fullerton or Bloomfield Avenue?
Yes, sir. There will be a new commercial entrance at the southeast corner on Bloomfield Avenue, which, because of the topography of the street, will also need a slight ramp and then a recessed entry. This will also create a path to grade to the common public way from a secondary stairway onto Bloomfield Avenue. As you come around Bloomfield, the existing corner entrance remains the same. The existing storefronts will be replaced in kind, matching the same color and mullion configuration as the existing storefronts.
The columns are the same and survive there?
The columns on Bloomfield and coming halfway around the corner on North Fullerton are the same and survived.
Okay.
On the current area of the exterior wall at the street level on North Fulton, it's sloping downward towards the north, from south to north. We are proposing to install 2 new storefronts that match the existing storefronts and columns to match the existing columns at the first floor level. It would be a storefront of 16'6", which matches the one adjacent to it, and the remaining area would be 12 foot.
So you're adding columns in that location?
We're adding columns.
You're adding columns and adding storefronts on the North Fullerton side, going north.
Correct.
Got it.
And I can show that in elevation to you, too.
So, looking at the picture,
Yes.
so you're taking, is this a wall?
That's
What is
a wall-
this? So you're
currently
taking
a
that
wall.
down and you're opening this up with more
Correct.
storefronts? Okay.
We're carrying the storefront around to the north corner.
But just this, the entrance here is staying the same?
The
On the
entrance-
corner?
The entrance is staying the same on the corner. These are existing storefronts that are going to be replaced in kind, including the glass panels that are below them. This would be a new storefront. This bay would be a new storefront, but the columns that we would be separating the bay would match the height, the width, and the material of the existing columns. Then this new entrance and the handicap accessible ramp to provide access to that entrance.
Let me ask you a question specifically about that. Can you avoid going into the public right away with that ramp?
We can't.
Okay, you can't make the accommodations within the building?
Because of the topography of the site, that landing elevation is halfway between the lower level and the first floor level. So we are accessing
I thought
the,
you were putting a lift in.
we're putting a lift in, but because the existing gradient exceeds 1/20, we have to countergrade in order to create a level enough and accessible ramp to get to the doors. We have to have a certain amount of level area outside of the door.
Okay.
And we
But
wouldn't be able to
the
do that with the
platform is 3
existing
feet
topography.
high, right?
The platform, from the point where the ramp starts to raise up, there is 10 feet of ramp. We need to make up 10 inches so that we can have a horizontal platform, a level platform in front of the doors. Has to be 5 feet
Oh,
out.
Sorry, I thought I read 3 feet on the plan, so it's only 10
No.
inches high?
Yeah, 10 inches high is the ramp.
So just for further clarification, sorry, Tony, I mean,
Well, it's just, for
The
10
street's
inches, you're
doing this
taking
the whole way.
a substantial area of the sidewalk,
We have to
which,
create a flat platform.
yeah, but, I have a problem, I have a problem with that, because in Montclair Center, you want nice, free walking spaces and so forth. And if there is a way to get that leveling within the building, that'd be great, but, yeah, I don't know all about it.
It isn't, because of the topography, it's in excess of 1/20. It's almost excess of 1/12. So you basically have a ramp from the intersection of Bloomfield and North Fullerton, heading north, from south to north. it's dropping at a rate of 1 inch for every 12 feet. So in order to make that a legal, accessible entrance, which all of them have to be, we have to counter the slope and then create a level landing area.
You've got level entrances in the new entrance that you're putting on Bloomfield Avenue that doesn't have the dangerous slope going down. Because what I didn't realize.
And this is our secondary means of egress from the building. Stairs already there. We have to bring those stairs to a public right-of-way for a second means of egress. So we have a second means of egress.
Right. So the entrance that's there now has a ramp. A person who needs to use a ramp can't use the ramp in front of the building?
That is not an accessible entrance. By ADA standards, that is not accessible entrance. There's no level area, a landing outside of those doors. It starts to slope immediately from the doors to the grade. And then it counterslopes in both directions. Because the high point is the corner of the intersection of Bloomfield and Fullerton, North Fullerton.
So just to understand.
So that doors only access that one tenant space as well. We need to make all the tenant spaces accessible.
Oh, so that's the answer.
Just to understand further, because we'll come back to the ramp, which my colleague correctly points out is a bit problematic. Right now, the existing building here, we're seeing it in 1955.
Right.
What is this element right here? Is this like a brick wall? What is this?
Can I look at your drawing?
That's existing wall?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's above that?
But-
Some windows?
There's some transom windows.
Transom windows?
Yes.
And what's to the left of that that's showing a little open?
It's a door that's a non-accessible entrance.
So what is it going to right now?
It goes to the stair tower.
So there's a stair in there already, no
Correct.
elevator.
And an elevator too, right?
There is an existing elevator, but the existing elevator isn't, well, first of all, it's a very old elevator.
Right.
It doesn't meet ADA standards. And we're putting a brand-new elevator on the other side that will access all the floors and provide a single accessible entrance for every tenant space, where the one in the back does not.
What?
And the bathrooms, the new bathrooms?
And the new bathrooms are in that infill,
And the bathrooms are on the third floor, the ADA?
on every
bathroom?
floor. There's
On
going to be
every floor.
accessible
Okay.
ADA-compliant bathrooms on every floor.
Okay.
Well, I have to carry this a little further, and then I'm going to let the engineers address the platform rise issue. There's a dead building, effectively the brick building to the left, which is Sushihana, I guess?
Yes.
That whole area, wouldn't it make more sense to try and work out putting your ramp in that dead area right there going left, even though that's not part of your building?
I don't
Maybe
believe,
work-
I believe the Sushihana is
Right up against it.
right up against it. There's no area to
Well, you're
access a
showing
ramp.
brick right here. You're saying that you just did that for fill, for drafting fill?
But that's going down the hill one more. He's got to get up the hill to come.
Yeah, this building right here
Yeah.
abuts the back of the Hampton house. The Sushihana butts the back of the
Right, but
Hampton
that's
house.
just a
There's no
dead brick,
space.
isn't that just a dead brick area? The Sushihana doors
It's-
are out of sight on
Oh,
this.
right, they're in the middle.
What I'm saying, they're in the middle, you got a dead area.
But this is our building.
I'm-
This is the property line.
I understand.
We're trying to keep the ramp within the property line.
I
If we
understand.
go further down, we end up with a much bigger ramp. We're sloping this way.
But what
If
I'm,
you try to flip the ramp to the other side, you're going to be adding another 10-plus feet of ramp to try to make up the difference.
I think maybe what you're trying to get across, Mr. Schwartz, is can the ramp be indented into your building on North Fullerton rather than being in the right-of-way?
Right.
Not sure how you would accomplish that.
Nor, I'm not either, I'm not an architect, but it seems to me that rather than being out on the sidewalk, if it were somehow capable of being
That's what Tony's
inset into the building.
Well, let me just add, I mean, that's kind of where I'm going. Right now, there's a door there right now that meets the sidewalk. It might be a little crooked, it's not.
It's very crooked.
But it's.
And the slope of the sidewalk
doesn't-
isn't accessible.
but
So
that's
it's
an
not
existing
just the
condition.
door.
I don't think that you'd be required to change the entire slope of the sidewalk. I don't
We
think-
can't.
That's my point. But the door, you have an existing door that does meet the sidewalk. So I'm thinking, can you, with minimal regrading of the sidewalk, without necessarily going in, without creating this big ramp, can you regrade that so it's level, minimally, get into the building, and then do your vertical? You already have a lift, just do whatever vertical transportation you need within the building, without creating this 20-foot ramp.
You're going to have
Because it already meets the grade right there.
when you have an exit door, the door is going to swing out. That door is going to encroach on that public sidewalk.
Only when it's open.
When it's open. Then you have to have another 2 feet beyond that door of level area. And then you have to be able to traverse onto level grade. If you make a level landing on a sloped site, you got to step off. You're going to have a step off on one side, and then you're going to have a step off in front. It may be level on one side.
So I guess you can't build a space in the basement without the...
We can't fit, yeah.
So can you make it one space and...
The basement, the open basement space comes all the way to the exterior perimeter walls. This is our bank where you're talking about.
So could you
This is our bank,
have the
this is our
store-
whole electric service
Oh,
comes in there.
Okay. So could you, let's start with the commercial space on the first floor. Could you do the commercial space on the first floor without the ramp on Fullerton?
We have we were creating an accessible exit from that tenant space on Fullerton and
Well, that
on,
already has 2 exits in the front. You've got one on the corner, right, and you have one... You have, the new one that you're putting in is...
we're making a secondary accessible entrance
Do you need
to
a
the
second-
lower, yeah, absolutely, to the
You need
lower
2 means
tenant
of
space.
egress?
From each space. Lower level, which is here. This is the way out of that lower tenant space. This is the other exit
Okay,
out of
let's
the,
start with the first tenant space. Okay.
this
So
is
you
the
get-
below grade.
Oh, could you put on the first floor tenant space? I'm sorry. Okay, so you're a handicapped person in there, and you're saying you're providing 2 means of egress. One is to go out in your new entrance hallway there, right? The black line?
Over here?
That's one way
Yes,
out?
that's one way out. This
And
is
then
the
the
second
front,
way out.
you can't make, that's the second. So
Right.
you have 2 means of egress for your first floor
They're
commercial.
too close.
They're too close.
They got to be more than 50% of the diagonal distance apart from each other to be legal legal means of egress.
Really?
Correct.
Isn't there some sort of area calculation that comes into that?
No,
Okay.
not in
All right, so
distance
then-
between exits. But we have to have this exit. We have to have the stairs for the lower tenant.
I'm just talking about, you can't satisfy egress right there. Okay.
No. We have this one. This one's next to it. If you take the diagonal, divide it by half, that exit has to be more than half that diagonal way.
And you can't ramp it with, you can't, well, so I'm...
Anything-
I'm in a
anytime you
wheelchair,
flatten
right?
out, you're gonna have a curb.
I'm in a wheelchair on the first floor, so how do I get out? I have to go down, right? How do I go down?
There's a lift here, but you can also come out and have an accessible entrance
Okay, but
onto
if the power goes
Bloomfield.
out, so you're depending on an elevator to get out? I thought you need more of a clean, I mean, how do you...
This is accessible by grade.
I get that, but your
This is
second...
accessible by a platform lift.
And that's okay, that's
That's
legal?
okay.
So you take the platform lift down to that area.
Correct. Which is halfway between the first floor and the lower level, only as a result of the topography of the existing street.
All right.
It'd be a lot easier if it was level.
Because you have a door there, it's right there, it's just not, it's just that
As soon as
fixtures.
you flip that tilted plate, you're creating curves. As soon as you create curves, you got to provide protection. And in addition, you have to have 2 feet of level space beyond the outermost swing of the door. And you're going to end up putting something around it anyways because you don't want people getting hit by an outswinging door.
So in
And
summary,
there's
what
still
you're saying
6
is
feet.
that
There's still 6'6" left.
there's no way to do it working the grade of the sidewalk there reasonably.
I
You've
wish
got to
there
put it in
was.
that. Okay.
There's not.
So you're saying that the sidewalk would be 6 feet at that point?
Yeah, the sidewalk is more, it's like 6'3"
6'3". Whereas without the ramp, what's the size of the sidewalk?
11'5",
So you're losing 5 feet or so.
which is the minimum that we can make it, and have an outswinging door with the 2 foot of clearance beyond. But all our electric service comes right in here. So there's the entire electric bank is in the basement there, which we can't change because it's all underground. So this is where the entire electric service comes in, and this is where the new water service and fire protection service come in.
So when someone comes out of Sushihana and looks left or south, what does she see?
When they look south, they're going to see a 42-inch high railing that HBC approved the design for, and then 6'3" of open sidewalk.
And the height of the ramp is 10 inches.
10
at that
inches.
point.
At the highest, yeah, at the highest point.
Then that'll be the high point.
This would be there'd be
Yeah.
10 inches and then a 42-inch railing.
Right.
10 inches high.
10 inches high, 42-inch railing.
Is this like a decorative railing or just a basic?
It's a decorative railing. It's a thin wire railing with square wrought iron pieces that HBC approved of. Had it changed at one point.
Part of the HPC memo that's in the record, that was one of their comments, the railing, to make sure it matches the style of the building. Also, the storefronts and that entrance, keeping with the historical aspects of the building. If you look at the 1940 picture, that entrance actually was a lot higher. You can see the architecture. You know, working with the HPC, we've made that, now it's consistent straight line.
Did you present?
That's the best elevation. I don't, it's fairly small. I don't know if you guys can see it, but that's the sushi place.
Did you present a topo, an existing topo sidewalk in your survey?
We have topo that we would incorporate as part of the construction. But
because I also noticed that the sidewalk now has a pretty severe pitch from the building laterally toward the curb. So obviously the sidewalk pitches down from Bloomfield Avenue down Fullerton, but it also, I'd say about 4 feet or so, there's this really steep, kind of almost like unwalkable portion of the
it's
sidewalk.
enough that it's not enough that we can't make a transition to a 5-foot level area that would commence and begin the beginning of the ramp coming to that door. And the only other change, and this was another HBC recommendation, is the current precast concrete band stops right at where that blank wall is. They wanted us to carry that all the way to the northwest corner of the building. And then this is what you see on the back. This is the Sushihana building.
Mm-hmm.
There's that section of ramp and sidewalk. There's an existing window there. This is existing painted precast. And then this is the only portion, the 11-foot portion of the addition infill that you would be able to see.
Is the Sushihana building part of the Hampton house? Is it the same? It's a separate
Separate
owner?
owner, yes.
Separate owner. And Mr. Gould, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Before we go any further, we're talking about retail space,
Yes.
period. No apartments.
No
all.
residential use. There would be most likely office use, second and third floors.
Second and third floor.
Retail first floor, office second and third, but no residential
What's
at
in the
all.
basement?
That would also be retail space.
There's
In
no
the
windows
basement?
down there, are there?
Is there windows?
There aren't currently any windows. Any natural light would only be from that door in North Fullerton.
So if you're on the commercial space on the second.
It
and
was
third
retail.
floor,
There was retail down there.
what's the two means of egress if you're on the upper part of the building? How do you get
Okay.
out?
So you have the 2 stairs go all the way up, the whole 3 floors. There's the existing, we're on the 3rd floor here.
Mhm.
There's the stair, there's the stair, that's the elevator. This is the area infill with the 10-foot
See, this is what I
set.
don't understand. You have to walk all the way down the stairs. Obviously, a handicapped person can't walk down the stairs, but then you can't make this little grade change at the street. It doesn't make sense.
Well,
I
the
know-
elevator, The elevator can be used as a means of egress.
But
for
when you get out to
handicap
the street-
accessibility.
Well, suppose the elevator doesn't work.
Well, the elevator has emergency power
Oh,
if the
okay.
power goes out.
So the basement was like the bargain basement of the furniture store.
Correct.
Which, you know, was like.
The basement
Right,
could also
so-
be an
Just went down there and
office.
picked up if it's
The
there.
basement could
Right,
also
they
be
had
office use
The
as well.
scratch and dent sale, but, so it's going to be up for lease, the
Yeah,
basement?
it's not bad space. I mean, it has brick walls, you know, it has some timbers in the, you know, the floor structure. It's okay. It won't go as much as the first floor, but it's okay.
Mhm. And how many retail spaces will there be down on the first floor?
There could be
6?
2 on the first floor,
Just 2?
yes.
What do you envision? What kind of retail do you envision?
That I would defer
We are
to.
in negotiations with a retail tenant.
Well,
As we currently speak.
what kinds of
Yeah.
things, because there's no.
It would help us.
parking.
It would help us
They're
to
exempt from
understand a
parking.
little better.
Yeah, so
They're exempt from parking by our ordinance.
Yeah, that I know, yeah.
Right, but the practicality is.
Yeah,
there is no
I mean,
parking.
is it a gym? Is it a
No.
clothing store?
it would be like a retail, the tenants we're talking to now are retail stores, is all I think I can say. There's a confidentiality agreement in place, but it's for shopping,
It's not a gym?
not a gym.
Gym would be public assembly, or would be an auditorium and assembly use anyway, so it would be different than retail. Mercantile,
I
there's
don't-
specific
I don't
definitions
know
for
those. Yeah, I
mercantile
don't
and
know that.
office. And any sort of
Lingo.
gym, it wouldn't be something that would be considered an assembly occupancy.
Oh. That's-
Which a gym
I've
would
never
be.
heard those terms. Well,
And Mr. Gould, you just said it's likely that there'll be commercial space on the second and third floor,
Right.
rather than apartments.
No,
When you
it's
say
definitely not apartments, that's not
So
part of the
definitely not
application.
apartments,
Not
so it's
apartments. This is
going
for
to be-
commercial retail use, so I was just
commercial
conferring-
retail use.
Right.
So you could have, you know, a store, like what we call
Well,
a
we-
store, going up to the second, on the second floor.
You could, I mean,
Yeah.
so one of the potential tenants would have a retail component on the first floor,
Mm.
and then use the second floor for
Okay.
office space.
Okay.
Okay?
Well, so I have another question. Are you anticipating that you're going to use the same lettering as the Hampton House for your new tenants?
Yes.
So it'll look like the same, like whatever it is, Deco, I guess,
So-
Art Deco?
Correct.
Okay.
And it's the existing
Size.
painted metal background of the signage will remain as is, but the new signage will be conforming in height and width to what's allowed. The only component that would be conforming, hold on. I got it. All right. We're back. Sorry about that. All right. The only component that isn't conforming is the method of internal illumination of the actual letters. But HBC wanted us to retain that method of internal illumination and has recommended us for the variance.
You mean neon tubing, right?
Neon tubing, correct,
Which-
that's what they want.
Normally, we don't,
Yeah, I
it
know.
works
It
really
goes
well
with
here.
neon,
Yeah.
It goes with the look of it. And
So
the
it's gonna be the
colors are
same
staying the
size?
same?
Colors stay exactly the
Yeah,
same.
okay.
Same size and everything?
Same size. That's the existing backing, that's the existing painted metal backing, that stays the same. We're restricting the width to conform with your length requirements and the height requirements of the letters.
It looks narrow on the drawing, though. If you look at the photograph, it takes up half the space between, and if you look at the Hampton House photo,
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
it
Yeah.
looks much narrower.
Narrower in terms of the banding.
I mean, check it out. It looks like it takes up about half that tan part.
Oh, those letters are
The
I
new
think
letters are
these
smaller.
this is the banding, that's the banding size.
Oh, that's what I was
I
asking.
think these
The
letters are
letter's the same
excess what
size.
you allow for signage
Okay,
height.
so we're talking about matching the size of the little space where it says furniture, not where it
Correct,
says
which is
Hampton House.
1'10". 1 foot 10 by 24 foot 6 is the allowable area that we can use for signage
So it'll be a lot
on two
smaller.
facades.
Be a lot tinier.
Oh, so it's a small, for the furniture is
The
the size that we're
furniture?
talking about?
Yeah.
It's the
One,
furniture
yeah,
letters.
1 foot 10, this is the existing
that-
band,
what
1
if that
foot 10 height
recommendation
by
comes?
24 foot 6 is all that we're allowed.
Well, I know that the ordinance allows 24-inch letters.
But 1 foot 10 is still
Right.
It's
fairly
20
substantial.
That's 12 plus 10, that's 22 inches. So it's
22 inches.
It's 20, yeah, so it's 2 inches smaller than what we permit.
What are
Right.
what are the current letters? How high are those?
I don't recall off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Ballpark?
No, I think they're more than 24 inches.
Because I mean, what I'm looking at is the HPC recommendation that the size, scale, and mounting of the proposed sign be consistent with the existing Hampton House sign. And the commission supports, being the commission, the HPC supports any variance relief needed for the proposed sign to replicate the existing. I mean, that was their recommendation. The way I read that is make your new sign look almost exactly like the Hampton House sign in terms of height of the letters, color.
Well, the color stays the same,
I know, well, okay, so height.
and I didn't measure that portion personally, but I was told that that existing banding is 1 foot 10 or 22 inches.
I mean, we did notice for the size of the letters, we did notice a variance, which I said we're only seeking two, which is the internal illumination. We did seek a variance to the extent we need to exceed the 24 inches in the code, so that's part of the application.
But
I don't think we needed the variance, but if that's part of approval, I think my client is certainly willing and wants to match the existing Hampton House signage. I mean, that's,
But how many signs are you going to have on the Bloomfield Avenue frontage?
so the tenant that we're,
Because you have two tenants, right?
we have two tenants, although I think the tenant that we're talking actually has the same number of letters as Hampton House, or somewhere close to, and it would be on both sides, right where the Hampton House
So there'll be
signage is.
more signs. There'll be, because you have two businesses, will there be two signs on Bloomfield and maybe one sign on North Fullerton?
One on each side.
One on each side, match existing.
Okay.
No additional signs.
Okay.
Can I just get clarity? The letter height is 1 foot 10 inches,
Correct.
no higher,
No higher.
no higher.
But that's not as high as the existing Hampton House letters.
I am not 100% sure.
Okay.
Looks like it fits the sign band.
Yeah, that,
It's 11 letters.
Can I get you on?
And the HBC wants those same letters.
But we don't know how high
Same,
the-
same size,
It
same
exceeds-
height, same height?
Same height.
It exceeds the sign band?
It exceeds the sign band. You look at the picture and
I
it
think we
does.
need to have, I think we need to actually have a dimension. We can't just say match.
We have another witness who actually measured the existing sign that we could call and put him under oath.
Yeah, that would help.
Okay. Steve, you want to come up?
I have a question. With the ramp, if this was if this is potentially two large tenants, how will their goods be entered into the building? So let's say it's the Pottery Barn. How do you get all those cases of glasses and furniture? Where is?
The loading zone.
Thank you.
The loading zone, yeah.
Where
There's
is
no
that?
loading- There is no loading zone in this building.
So would they use that ramp?
They would probably use the ramp because then they have to negotiate stairs. If it was the lower tenant,
can you use the
they would
microphone?
They would probably come in through the
Mr. Manning?
Bloomfield entrance and use the elevator.
You need to use a mic.
Yeah.
Mr. Manning, we need you on the microphone, just so we make sure we get your comments.
So, more than likely, the entrance would be on the Bloomfield side, and then utilize the elevator to go up to the upper floors or down to the basement.
So the ramp would never be used as a loading zone?
No. No.
Is there
It
already?
wouldn't be, because you have to negotiate a half a flight up and a half a flight down.
Is there already a loading zone at all demarked
No,
on
there's no
Bloomfield
loading
Avenue?
zone. The
Okay.
furniture for the Hampton House was brought in through the front doors.
Oh, wow.
So Steve Young is the applicant's contractor,
Project manager.
project manager.
Mr. Young? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You've already stated your name. Would you please state your business affiliation for the record?
I'm a project manager for GaRE Venture.
That's your business?
Well, I am a general contractor from Cedar Grove, New Jersey, S.J. Young and Associates. Done numerous projects in Montclair, Chocolate Works, a lot in the Wedgwood building. Currently looking at a project at the Montclair Social Club. I physically got up and measured those letters on Bloomfield Avenue and North Fullerton. They are 22 inches high.
There we go.
The width, H is the widest. So,
Was there any thought to just keeping the building called the Hampton House and adding signage for the new retail space that might have been smaller or something? Because I guess people have lived here a long time. You know, think of that as the Hampton House building, but... And
That is a great idea.
Ooh.
I don't know why they would have been.
You could put the Hampton House sign, you could repurpose the existing Hampton House sign up near the top of the building, and it's sort of a name of a place in a way, and then lower you can just take that sign, put it up top.
You don't like that?
I mean, HPC was very happy with as long as we kept the same type of lettering.
The sign will live on.
What I can tell you is this, I was involved in the, I was
I'm
involved.
serious. I think it's a good idea. This is not, we're not kidding
No,
around.
it's actually.
We're not joking. This is, we're serious.
When the applicant,
It's an iconic building in town.
when the applicant purchased the building,
Yeah.
the seller, the Fishes, actually didn't want the Hampton House name to be used anymore, and my clients insisted that they'd be entitled to use the name.
Oh.
Because for that very reason, the reason you
Well,
brought up.
maybe not to sell furniture, but not. this
Well,
is like-
exactly, but for the
They can live on in
historical
perpetuity
significance
by
of the
using
Hampton
it
House
this way.
building. So there was
Yeah.
thought given to that.
But, I mean, the HBC nixed it, or you just wouldn't think of it doing it?
No, I mean, given the development, but I think if you're talking about repurposing it on a different part of the building, I don't know that my client would necessarily be opposed to the reuse of that.
I think
And then
Mr.
you're free
Rudy's
to
opposed
do
it.
what you want, you know, on the lower part for the individual tennis spaces.
I think HBC's reasoning was that the signage was there, and that as long as we kept the design intent of the signage, which matched the stylization of the building, that they would rather have it repurposed as the name of the tenant.
They consult with us.
No, take
They don't-
the sign that we have, just
We don't
stick it on
have
the
to
top
do
of
what
the
they
building.
say.
No, that would change too much for historic preservation. You've changed the whole design of the building.
Not really.
You're demolishing it.
Well, you're taking it off completely now. I thought we better leave it up there.
Let's
Yeah. Well, take the HPC comments under advisement.
Oh, thanks.
We'll think about it.
Well, okay, I'll make one more pitch.
Okay.
I grew up not too far from here. This sign is a really cool sign that those of us have been in town, like,
Yeah.
it is a part, if there's any sign anywhere in Montclair, this is the sign that's really significant. And all I'm saying is that, I mean, I think if you have any beer with anyone who grew up around here, this is really recognizable at this intersection. So the suggestion to keep it, I think, if you poll people, that's pretty cool. But that's, you know, it's your building, but,
You can do that.
you know. And I think it frees up a lot of things. You preserve, because you don't want to do, you know, neon's expensive. You have a nice neon sign, so you just keep that neon. You don't have to pay for it, you have it.
Well, one of the conditions of the HPC report is that any historical element removed from the building be preserved by the applicant. So,
And what?
But don't, yeah, what with?
Put it in the
Store.
Put it in
basement.
storage?
there you go.
Yeah, I don't know.
And the new sign is the new sign is going to replicate the look of the existing
Right.
sign.
That's just not the same, though.
I don't think the board is in a position to mandate as a condition of approval the
you rename the
continuation of
building.
the Hampton sign, even though it's a good idea from a historic perspective, Tony.
Well, maybe the trade is that we could take a narrower sidewalk if we get a sign.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
It's a horse trade.
Well, okay, let's,
Just saying.
I'd like to come back to your, I'd like to come back to your point.
You can't coerce the applicant by saying you want to approve them. That you
Well,
can't
there's a
go in.
public good aspect.
Yeah, it's saying what's in the overall good of the public.
Yeah, so Tony, I think you made some very good point about the encroachment on the public right-of-way there.
Are you agreeing with me?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
Yes. Sometimes it happens. And, but I've heard no alternative explanation how we might require them not to use the public
Well, I
right-of-way.
think the topo, I think getting the topo and seeing the actual dimensions may help determine how feasible, and I take you at your word that you can't, but if we saw the actual dimensions, since there is a door right there, I'm not quite convinced that you can't finesse it to make it work. with the existing grade.
And this is a place where I think I and others should defer to engineers whether or not this physically is feasible. If you're saying you believe there is an alternative way to do this as an engineer.
I don't know. I'm not doing this as an engineer. I'm just saying that we have a door there's a door right there and it meets the sidewalk.
Yep.
So if we have the topo around the door, the elevation of the landing inside, and a couple spot grades, you can sort of see better.
Well,
So
we have
that,
an
Just
engineer.
as a quick exercise then, we have a door that's 10 feet, or 10 inches above the existing grade at that door, right?
Correct.
Plus or minus.
Oh, it's not
to the
at
width
grade?
of the.
No.
No, that's
It's
the
a step.
10-inch height that we're creating with the ramp,
Correct.
right? Is to get back down to grade at a compliant slope away
I'm
from
looking at
the
a
building.
door. It doesn't look like 10 inches.
So if you go from that 10-inch height and you come out to the existing curb line, you're going to create a need for ramps in both, help me out, is it east and west?
North and south.
North and south directions along North Fulton. Which would effectively have to ramp up and do more improvements off-site in the sidewalk to meet up to the area that you're ramping out of the building. To get out of the building with a compliant slope, you have to run it along the side of the building at the slope he's using on the ramp.
You can do it inside too, right?
If you were to do it inside the building, you're gonna compromise
The space on the
the
inside.
space you
and
have
that's where
available
all the
for the
utilities come
architectural
into the
design
building.
of the entirety of the building. So right now, you're coming into a small landing area, stair sets, and the half-story loft or lift.
So there's not
If
enough
you were to address that interior to the building, you'd have something more comparable and extensive as what you see on Bloomfield Ave at the other corner, where you're running at least a quarter to a third of the way into the building to make up that space and create the level landings on both sides of the ramp that are required.
Maybe that's a good trade-off, to just do that inside the building instead of outside the building.
But that doesn't get you to the 10 inches to actually get in the door.
No,
It doesn't.
You still need the 10 inches to get in the door.
So you'd have to start 10 inches lower, come
you
into
have
the
to have
building
a
at
level landing
and
area
then
no matter
come
what.
I'm looking at a
up inside
photograph
the
that
building.
doesn't look like it's 10 inches. It starts smaller. If we had the topo
That is.
I measured it is 10 inches.
at the highest point, and then what it is at the lower point,
Can use your microphone?
because it slopes down, right?
Mr. Young?
You gotta use the mic.
It's slope down towards Sushihana.
Well, there's a light-colored door that I see in the photograph. It's a light-colored door. You're saying that curve is 10 inches?
Yes. Yes.
So that means there's a step to get in the door?
Yeah.
Or a
Yes,
step before?
correct.
Yes, the existing door.
So, I mean, you don't have to be an engineer. If you have a sloped plate and you raise it up, you're creating a curve on one side. And the only way you're going to create a level area to traverse from the sidewalk into a level landing to get into that door is to create that curve, and that curve is 10 inches. And in order to have an accessible door, you need additional 2 feet beyond the outswing of the door at its furthest point of its swing.
And that's where you're getting out to the 5 feet in width.
Correct,
of
that's
the
why
ramp.
we need 5 feet.
And so Tony, if you look at that 5-foot swath, where you were commenting earlier about the sidewalk actually changes pitches throughout the section across, that first 5 feet is the hard slope section from the building edge down to what is the more manageable portion of the sidewalk. It's not ADA accessible because of the slopes on the roadway, but that's the main thoroughfare of pedestrians, is that middle corridor, not up against the curbside and not up against the building.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
There's no way to make the landing for the door is to the west of the door. There's no way you can make the landing south of the door?
No, because that would be onto
How about north?
Sushi
How about north
Hanasville's
of the
property.
No, south.
No, that's south of the door. I was right.
Oh, south. Yeah, we are going south.
But I thought you said the landing is to the west.
The landing is to the west of the face of the building.
So I'm saying, can you make it to the south of the door instead of west of the door?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Let's go back and start over because you got me there. All right.
West is crossing the street.
Yeah, west is crossing the street.
But you said that the
Okay.
sidewalk
So
is...
here, this way is, that's north,
Right, and where's the landing?
right there. Just outside the face of the door at the northwest corner of the building.
Okay, well, is the landing west of the door, or is it...
The landing's centered on the door.
Okay. How wide is the landing?
It's 13 feet, the same width as the storefront.
Okay, so the door opens
Outward.
outward, and
the
that's
middle.
in the middle, that's 3 feet.
Correct.
And then how wide is the sidewalk going east-west?
This east-west, the sidewalk is 11 foot wide,
How wide is the ramp going east-west?
5 feet. So you have a 3-foot door and you have 24 more inches of clearance that you're
Why do you
required
need
to
the
have.
additional 24 more inches?
It's ADA requirements.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, you can't
You can't narrow the landing to 36 inches. Otherwise, someone in a wheelchair coming up that ramp has to have the ability to turn
Okay.
their wheelchair, pull the door to the side of them, and then access in.
Okay.
And that's
This
the
may
2
be
feet. That extra available space
I was
is
just
the
wondering
turning
if
of the
that 2
square.
feet could be north of the door instead of west of the door.
No, it's got to be in front of, it's got to be
This may
in
be
front
an
of the
odd-
door to the west.
This may be an odd question, but if you made the entire sidewalk the slope of the ramp, instead of just doing it 5 feet, did the entire sidewalk so that it sloped as a ramp would slope, wouldn't that make it the whole thing accessible to
Well,
everybody?
it's going to create either steps on the other side of it, or it's going to make more of a severe slope on the other side of it. Because if you take, this ramp is doing this, and if you take that sidewalk and do that, it's creating more of a vertical rise on the downward side.
Are you saying
I'm
that
not
the-
explaining.
that-
You want me to try? I'll try it again. The sidewalk is the sidewalk, and I'm just drawing like if you're cutting through the street. The sidewalk's doing that. I'm exaggerating. It's not that steep. And basically, what we're doing with the ramp is we're doing that.
It's an infill.
It's an infill. We're putting a wedge in on the slope to create a level landing area. But what happens is that height from there to there has to be protected with a railing. Otherwise, somebody would step off of it. You can't take the side, again, this is the sidewalk. You can't take the sidewalk and raise it back up and then try to get back down to meet that same level of grade.
On the south side of the ramp, it's still higher than the north side, is that correct?
Correct,
You're
much
going
higher.
out to- If you can take that ramp from where it is there to Bloomfield Avenue, which is continually going up, it's not going up and then
It's
down
going,
again,
yeah,
right?
no, it's always going up.
Right.
As you're
So my
headed south,
question
it's
would be,
rising.
Suppose there was no part of that sidewalk that was higher, that the whole sidewalk sloped up so that it would be that you
But
don't have
it can't. It
create a
can't, because
continuation of
it's
our
just
sidewalk.
yeah, it's just a
along the
continuation of the street. We have to follow the street gradient. So the street's doing this, the sidewalk has to do that. And what we're doing is just taking a little piece of that sidewalk and tipping it up to create a level landing area. We can't do the whole, we can't change the topography of the whole sidewalk. It has to be in a uniform plane with the street.
Okay.
We can't lift the pedestrian the 10 inches to get into the door in any less length than the length of that ramp.
Right.
That ramp is the compliant length.
The minimum
The minimum
required.
required.
I was
length.
just thinking of doing it longer, not less. I was thinking of making it a slope that sloped up more gradually, so that it was a longer ramp, not a shorter ramp.
And you could take the ramp
Because 10 inches
longer-
didn't seem like that much for the curve, but maybe it would be.
You could take the ramp longer to the corner, but it would put the pedestrian further away to access that point. And you still have to maintain the rest of the sidewalk at the existing grades that we have.
Okay.
Well, here's a radical thought. Where does the grade start to slope? I mean, my point is, could you move where the door is so that you put the ramp in the inside and you're cutting into your tenant's potential space, but on the other hand, you're not cutting into the sidewalk?
That's the northeast corner right there. There's Bloomfield, there's North Fullerton.
Right.
That's the northwest corner, I apologize.
Okay.
Northwest corner.
Right.
Immediately as you start turning the corner, it goes down.
Okay. So,
Moving this door in any
Makes it
direction
more-
doesn't
Wouldn't-
change the gradient. It's a uniform slope. You'd have that situation at any point
Any
here.
point, all right.
I think it makes more sense to have it move away from the intersection.
Is there any opportunity for a lift on the exterior as opposed to the ramp?
You got the same, yeah, you do have the same, you still have a door. You still got to deal with a door.
Right, well, I'm just asking. So we've seen other applications that had a fold-down ramp that somebody could put back up. It was
But-
ADA compliant. I didn't know if something like that might
By
be
the
possible.
time you try to incorporate that lift and a way for ambulatory people to get out that same way and bypass the lift, you're going to end up with a structure that's close to that same size.
Talking about an aesthetic, too.
And yeah, this is
Trying to
much
find
this is
solutions
much
for
cleaner.
The board and the applicant.
one more question, though. So you say you have to have an extra 2 feet because the door opens
Correct.
out. What if you had a sliding door?
You can't. It's
You
got to
can't
be a
do that?
swing door, yeah.
Why?
The sliding doors isn't considered a means of egress unless it's like a grocery store door where you can break it away.
So, you couldn't have that?
Like an electric, when you go to the grocery store, it opens electronically?
You still got to have this level space in front of it. That's
You
correct.
do, but you don't need 5 feet of it. You just need 3, I thought. Because I thought you had to have an extra 2 feet for the swinging door.
Requires you have 5 feet.
5-foot turning radius.
Whether you have the open door that opens or not. Okay.
5 feet.
Thank you.
Just trying to think.
You need the ability to take that wheelchair and turn it on the
Yeah,
diagonal
yeah,
and cut
okay.
across.
Yep.
Right.
And navigate the door operation.
Well, I was thinking if you didn't have to navigate, slide it over.
Still have to.
Any other questions?
While we're on this entrance, just real quick, there is a tree outside, a tree well outside of this location, right at the edge of the property between
Oh, yeah,
and
there it
Sushi
is.
Place. Do you have a dimension on the distance to the tree?
I
to
do
show
with the
clear sidewalk
survey.
before the side of the ramp?
Let me see if it's on this one.
It looks like the ramp.
He's right.
The ramp would align with that in the cross section.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that we still have, ADA accessibility on our sidewalk.
If you take a, yes, there is, the tree is shown. And it looks like
Is it directly opposite the door?
it's offset of the door.
See,
Yeah, but there's the tree right there.
Near the
Yeah, and there's the
property line.
camp.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's,
And that's the point of egress.
that's the point of egress currently. Continues to the end, yeah.
If you're coming out of sushi.
Yeah, and I can throw a scale on it and tell you.
Obstructing
It's going to be, just as long as it's wide enough for ADA.
Joe,
It
we
is.
can't, we need to have you on the record.
So we're obstructing the sushi.
The question was to confirm ADA width for access on our township sidewalk.
Yeah.
As you pass the tree on your left or right, and then on the opposite side, the new proposed
I
ramp.
don't like this.
Because it would be effectively a wall there.
Yeah, so it's very, very.
It's going to be tight.
It's over, it is over 5.
It's over 5 feet.
Well, Joe, would it make sense to have them move
To
this?
potentially move the tree would
Move
be
the
the
tree.
easy solution. Right,
Easiest solution.
right. If we find during construction that you don't have the width.
Show the tree, show 100 feet.
Sure.
But I think that perhaps one of the conditions of the approval could be a requirement to, because you're out, I don't think you can move the tree, you'd have to take down the tree,
Yep.
relocate the tree well, and then plant a new tree.
Plant a new tree, correct.
You're gonna move that tree well further south.
It would
It
move-
would make more sense to either, to move it south or to move it
you'd
north.
probably move
South
it
would
towards
make more
sushi.
sense. I
You
agree.
have to have their consent for that. Right.
I think it'd look better to have it south. 'Cause there's
This
already-
way.
Yeah,
Yes,
not, north is towards sushi.
right.
Right.
South would,
Further
What is it?
north, okay, so you have to get past the entrance to the ramp.
right, which
And
would
you-
mean
then you
about
start getting closer
15,
to
it
the-
would mean about 10 feet.
Or your signage.
Could.
Or the sign, yeah.
Or your signage.
But it's not unusual to
If you
have
go to
trees,
sushi,
you
it'll
know,
be
have
right
trees
away.
opposite 11-foot sidewalk in front of windows.
Well, I'm just saying, if we move it, it's still done the right of way. I don't know that we need to.
Middle of this
Very inconvenient for the public. It's
In the
very
right of way?
busy. The bank is
It
next
is.
door to that.
Get their consent for what?
You'd have
I
to
feel
get
bad for the
the
restaurant.
town's
Yeah.
consent
Oh, right.
It's on
to
them.
the right of way, but you have to talk
I don't
to
like
them.
it.
Of course,
Well,
I mean,
we
yeah.
already know that.
Well, I'm
Would
gonna
be
ask them
conditioned
that.
on approval from the,
It would be a recommendation on your behalf.
or conditioned on approval from the council for the ramp, and with the township engineer for relocating the.
Correct.
And that's fine, I just need to
Well,
understand
let-
where it's going, so that where, in the best of all worlds, you would want to put it.
Wait,
Not here.
before we get to the tree, if we don't approve this, what's your plan B?
I have a plan B. Have
I
you
would,
tried-
I would defer to the developer for
You know,
Plan B.
You mentioned that you're taking someone's fire egress that they have now, and since you're blocking that, you're doing something to accommodate them.
Correct.
If you get out the other side of your building, there's a rear yard. It's right underneath the rooftop HVAC unit. If you put a door in, maybe you can get out to their backyard and get out of that area across their property, and sort of like they might return the favor.
That's, the fire escape issue was not an accommodation, that was actually an encroachment onto our building. So that was resolved through relocating it entirely onto their own property. There is no entrance through the rear of the building except through neighboring private properties.
Not a public way.
It's not a public way.
But you can still use it. It's in a setback. I mean, they'll never build there, so if you had an emergency, you could exit onto that space.
You can't exit onto private property.
Suppose you had an easement across it. I mean, I think, this is where I'm coming out. I think that you have to use a lot more creativity to solve the ramp issue. Really think hard about how to solve it, because this is going to be an eyesore. It's going to be, this is the busiest, one of the busiest intersections, and we're putting this ramp right where a lot of people walk. We're building the Midtown deck. We've got the Wellmont development coming. There's just, we're setting up the downtown for a lot of activity, and to build in the right of way, just, you got to.
I mean, you can see how far away the ramp is from that intersection.
But that whole street.
But it's
The bank is next door to these
it's a commercial district, so.
Can the ramp be considered offset into the building in that glass frontage area?
That's what I said.
Right,
That's
That
where
is where all the utilities come into the building, just beyond the edge of that ramp.
Does that mean they can't be moved at all?
They're all underground utilities that come in water electric, gas, all come in there.
Why can't you make the ADA entrance on the corner, the Bloomfield Avenue corner?
That's what I said.
Far enough away.
It's.
I think we covered
it's
that one already.
not far enough away from the other entrance, and it only accesses that one tenant space. So we have to have two remote entrances.
Mr. Greenbaum, you'll have a chance to ask questions. Let us finish. Thank you. Could you go through the HPC's recommendations?
You want
Sure.
to do that, John?
So that's Exhibit A7, which is the April 25th, 2019 report from the HPC. So the first condition is that the applicant document all of the, and the applicant accepts all of the HPC's recommendations, and that would be a condition of approval. If this board would act favorably, we would accept that.
Okay.
One is to document all of the existing facades, retain all removed
That's all I really
elements.
needed. You're accepting all of the
Oh, we're
recommendations.
okay, yeah, okay.
Okay. How about Mr. Vuich's memo?
Yeah, so we
Our
can
engineer.
address, I think the architect can address the comments. So
Sure.
his comments addressed the exterior signage and compliance with the code. I think we've covered that unless there's any questions. The ADA compliance, I think, has been covered at length. That's the reason for the ramp and the location.
Rooftop equipment screening and handling, storage, collection of refuse, recycling.
Right.
The rooftop equipment is screened with 4-foot aluminum screening. The rooftop equipment is placed in an area of the building that cannot be seen on Bloomfield or on North Fullerton, can only be seen from a portion of the private property behind the building.
Can I ask
But
a-
it is also 2 and 3 stories in the air. So a person on the ground is not going to have the ability to see that rooftop equipment.
Are there, in the building next door on Bloomfield Avenue, are there apartments that are above the retail space on the bottom?
No windows
No, I'm
go
not
to the
asking about
west.
windows, I'm just asking are there apartments? So can the gist of my question is, can the apartments hear your mechanical equipment?
There's
from where they are?
a 2-hour masonry, 240-inch, 24-inch wide party wall between the
Oh,
two
okay.
buildings.
All right.
And current standards for equipment also include noise.
Yeah, I know.
But you were just speaking of this dome-like feature at the top, that's what's going to be up there?
It's not a dome, it's existing roof, it's a hip.
So the top of the building is not going to change at all?
Not at all. In fact, the existing elevator, if you look at it from North Fullerton, if you have a photo of that, sticks up about 8 feet to 10 feet above the roof line. We're getting rid of it.
Okay, I see it.
You're taking that off the top of the roof?
Taking it off the top of the roof.
This little piece up here?
Yep.
They're relocating it.
Okay.
I had a question which I'm not sure is in, who to address it to, but exactly how many tenants are intended, if you count them all up, the basement and the 3 floors? What?
Question.
5.
5.
Yeah. there's
And for the
gonna be-
signage, will there be signage for the 5? Each tenant have its own signage, or how is that planned?
No, the signage would be on, the signage for the first floor retail tenant would be the one that would be visible on the Fullerton and Bloomfield sides. Anything else would be like a normal directory within the building.
Okay.
It's the same tenant sign that will be on Fullerton and Bloomfield Avenue?
That was the intent, yes, ma'am.
Well, you have 2 different tenants, right?
No.
You
The
said that
retail-
before.
Oh, they
Yeah,
could be different?
yeah.
Oh, they will be
My
different.
apologies, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So the Hampton House sign could go, and then you'd have 2 separate, even though the corner is very visible, both sides of it, you can read as
So
you
you
drive
could-
down.
So you could have
Pottery
Pottery
Barn
Barn
and Pier 1.
and Pier, Crate and Barrel, right. Oh.
Crate and Barrel, whatever.
Okay,
And no Hampton House.
right.
To answer your question, Ms. Slager, so
Yeah.
in terms of Plan B, there is no Plan B because it's, in this market, impossible really to replicate a single-use tenant like the Hampton House store has been here for 7 decades. So the applicant is really looking for, again, 2 retail users on the ground level floor, which would be the signage we're talking about, Hampton House signage, with office use on top, you know,
But-
law firms, counting, or this retail tenant that wants to use the second, potentially second floor for their, you know, office space.
But the handicap ramp that's on North Fullerton Avenue is really only for handicapped access to the lower level tenant.
First floor rear tenant.
Correct.
The handicap accessible access to the, all the other floors would be through the Bloomfield side via the elevator.
When you say first floor, it would be the one that's technically in the basement, right? Because the
No,
first
it'd be
floor,
the back of the first floor. There's 1 tenant in the basement, 2 on the first floor, 1 on the
but
second, 1 on
couldn't
the
the
third.
2 on the first floor have access from Bloomfield Avenue?
They do have 2 access points, but they still need an accessible means of egress that's remote, more remote than
Okay.
the 2 entrances on the Bloomfield side.
Excuse, Mel, I'm confused. Okay, there is an entrance on Bloomfield Avenue, which is
Correct.
handicap accessible.
Correct.
And there is an elevator which will take all, to all floors of the building.
Correct.
So that there is at least 1 handicap accessible access to all floors of the building. Is that correct?
But not the back tenant on the first floor,
Why not? Because there's a
because
a
that would
ramp
be
that goes-
accessed from the Fullerton side.
Why can't if they can get into the first floor, why can't they get access to both of the buildings, of the uses on the first floor?
Because they'd have to go through the other tenant
Wait a minute,
space in
but
order
can
to
they-
do
Well,
that.
Who's
can't
the-
you
the
make
corner-
the space, design it in such a way that one can come in on the first floor internally and get to all parts of the first floor?
All we're doing is adding a lift inside of the building. You would
Okay, but
still
here's my
have to create
question.
you'd still have to create the a level landing area on the
No,
North
what I'm
Fullerton
saying is if you
side.
get into the store and you're a handicapped person.
Yes, you could do that.
You're into the store.
Yes,
And one way to get downstairs to the basement is exist, in that you can take the elevator down.
that is correct.
Right, okay. Now, once you're in the store, it seems to me that now you have a way to create access to all parts of the store on the first floor.
You could.
Then why not do that instead of creating an outside access through the, through...
Because you need the outside access anyways to get to the basement
Well, you get to the
retail
basement through the
store.
elevator that's on the
No,
first floor.
you still got to have a second means of egress. We have to have, for that basement, we need an exit on Bloomfield, and we need an exit on Fullerton. And the
There's only
elevator.
one
And the
exit.
elevator.
There's only one way to get out, and that's... Okay.
Without that door on Fullerton, there's only one way to get out. We're using that entrance that we have to have anyways to create a second means of accessible entrance to the back of the retail space, so we don't carve up this very small retail space with a corridor.
I think you're hearing a lot of resistance from the board for this ramp being in the public right away.
I got that.
If you haven't figured that out, and, you know, I think we'd be looking for you to maybe take a second look at this and see
It
if
seems
there's
to me-
anything
I don't
else that
know.
could be done. Did you get through all of Mr. Vuich's questions? Mr. Vuich, are you comfortable? Yeah, your comments from your letter.
Engineering comments in the letter. Still, relative to this ramp, the idea of moving it into the building, right? I see.
How are you going
I see
to move it into the building without creating a level
Well, I see your lower.
entrance point on the sidewalk?
I see your lower level plan, A0, right, with this, the sprinkler electric room below that area, right? But at the entrance elevation on the first floor, that open stair lobby is the same elevation as the commercial tenant.
We have to enter into a level floor, and we have a sloped sidewalk. The only way we're going to be able to create a way to get into that building is to level the sidewalk. That even if we created an alcove that was 5 feet deep, we're still in the exterior going to have to level the sidewalk to reduce that pitch.
Right, but the
topography to come in.
height to the first floor elevation at the existing point of egress on North Fulton is 10 inches.
Correct.
The height of that same the distance to that same first floor elevation at the corner of the existing entrance is closer to 0.
That is also correct.
So the closer you move to that corner, the less of the 10 inches you have to make up in grade on the slope, which means you have less of a ramp outside the building, right? You have less of an impediment to work around.
The intent of having an exterior impediment on the outside of the building, I would think the further away from that intersection, the better.
But it may not have to be
That was an existing
How long is
entrance
it?
point.
20-something
That
feet?
point does create a second remote means of egress that's required from the basement.
Can you excavate that 10 inches to bring it to grade?
I don't even know what that
Mr.
means.
Greenbaum, you'll have an opportunity to ask your questions.
Okay.
You
Please.
will still have, the point
So-
being, you will still have a
The
level
closer you
pad
move it.
outside and some ramp of distance.
Correct. And then the more you move it, I mean, this is where historically that entrance was.
Right.
And that's the most, that's the
more you
most
move it
remote
over.
point of egress for that lower tenant space and that first floor space.
Okay.
So moving it forward,
Mike,
and I haven't done that
shorten the
calculation, but
ramp, but
it
it's
may
still
not
gonna be
work.
impacted.
It may not work with the distance between exit points.
I guess one of the problems is that we never in the past, in all the 70 years, was there a separate tenant downstairs, that people only went down there for brief periods of time, as opposed to, and in that case, the one elevator would have been enough, right? I think the problem is that you're trying
Well,
to access the basement for a place where people actually spend a lot of time, and therefore it needs its own egress. You're making that a separate business.
Correct.
Whereas in the past, the basement was only, you went down there for the
There was
bargains.
only one means of egress out of there in the basement. You couldn't do that today.
But only because you're spending time down there, right? This was kind of like.
No, you just can't have that and meet today's code.
Once you renovate, you can't meet the code then.
Correct.
But even if you didn't use the basement space, if you didn't use the basement space for retail use.
I mean,
Do you then need to have that handicap?
Well, that's what I was kind of asking.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
If you don't put a tenant in the basement.
Well, I think this all gets down to the viability of the project.
No, I'm just.
But her question.
So,
Well, that was what I was
no,
asking.
the answer is no. If that was dedicated just mechanical space, it doesn't need to be accessible.
But the first floor tenants, would you still need that second exit for the first
You
floor
do. You
tenants?
still need that exit from the
That's
first
the
floor
question.
tenants. But I think a lot of it has to do with the viability of the project. I mean, you're talking about trying to build an addition with a brand-new functioning elevator. You're talking about putting modernized HVAC equipment. You're talking making every floor of a building accessible that currently is not. And you're also talking about putting in accessible bathrooms. I mean, I think the owners have gone through enough of the economics of the situation to determine they need some income from that basement floor level in order to retrofit and revitalize this currently empty structure.
The economics aren't our concern, unfortunately.
I understand that, just
That's
thought
not-
I'd
that's
throw that
nothing
out
we
there.
can consider.
Hey, just one more question about the signage. If you have a retail tenant in the basement, if you have a retail tenant in the basement, where do you put the signage if it's, a shop? I know you said there's a directory for the upstairs tenants, but where's the signage for the retail?
It could be something that's just on the door.
Just on the door?
Yeah, and it would comply with whatever signage regulations you have for that.
So you're looking for a generic thing for the building as a whole, and then the individual. because you've
Correct.
got two tenants
Basically,
on
this
every-
is getting done to leasehold build-out, like a mall would. And
So
then
you're
you have
looking for a
individual
generic
tenants
reference
coming in and they
such as a
build out.
Hampton House or whatever you wanted to call it, and then they'd have individual signs for each of the buildings, each of the tenants.
But you're only allowed these two tenant space, or these two signs on the outside of the building. Anything else would have to be supplemental signage that's allowed by your code, which may be just lettering on vinyl lettering on the glass door or on the side light next to the door. but it would meet your code.
Other questions from the board? Questions from the public of this witness about what he's testified to this evening? Questions? Questions?
I'll stand here. You know, it's interesting. I see the problems, I'm hearing the problems, and I'm watching everyone go and trying to figure out, and I see it so clearly, and I want to just, you made a very important point a moment ago, and I want to make sure I repeat it on the record.
This is the time for question. I appreciate.
No, it's a question, but I
Okay.
want to make a statement, quick statement. The statement is, okay.
Questions,
Oh,
please.
the question is, did I understand correctly that you said the economic considerations of the project are not really relevant to the planning board's decision?
Questions of the witness about what he testified to this evening.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please.
Okay, so then the question I would have is the 10 inches that you referred to as the impediment for access for a wheelchair requiring the ramp, not just for the pitch, but also for getting in to grade, what is beneath that? And is it possible to excavate that 10-inch so that you can bring it down, bring that floor down to the level of grade?
You mean lower the whole floor?
Not the whole floor, the landing, just a landing.
That's what we're doing.
But
We're actually creating a landing that's at that lower level. That's halfway between the first floor and the basement because of the topography of the street.
right. The 10 inches, if I'm pointing correctly, that you described here, you said there's an existing
The
10-inch.
10 inches is a result of the pitch that occurs at the street.
And that was the point you were making.
If you bring that floor, if you bring that landing down, you're going to both be below grade on one side.
Okay. Okay.
So you can only bring that down until the grade is at a point where it's meeting, where the level of that landing meets grade. And we're doing that via that ramp.
Got it. You had mentioned when I asked about having the ADA.
Mr. Greenbaum, could you use one of the microphones? I mean, you could borrow Mr. Young's microphone,
Thank you very
perhaps?
much. All right, thank you. So when I had asked about the ADA accessibility at the corner, that would be the, let's see, the northeast corner. What?
It's the northwest corner.
Northwest corner. Well, okay.
It's on the southeast corner of the intersection.
That's what I was thinking, okay. At any rate, you were saying that the reason you can't do ADA access there was why?
Well, the existing floor level, you can see there, the grade slopes immediately as you come out the door in order to meet the existing sidewalk. It's fine for an ambulatory person, but it does not meet ADA requirements. If, in fact, it fully met ADA requirements, I would still have to have a second means of egress because this door is too close to the other corner on Bloomfield, and you have to have a required distance between required exits.
That was the part I didn't understand. So you're saying that the entrance on Bloomfield Avenue here, even if you had a passageway, it's too close?
Too close.
So therefore...
Because there's only 40 feet of frontage,
Okay.
and there's 80-something feet of depth. So you take a diagonal of the building, divide it by 2. The 2 exits cannot be any closer than that division.
If one was not to have an ADA here, and let's say the tenant on the ground floor also, as is often the case, occupies the basement as well, okay, and you had an internal lift in the center, you excavated an opening, you've often seen this, there's a staircase going down from the first floor to the second level, an interior staircase, and you could potentially put a lift within that where in the interior, would that address the issue?
No, because
No.
you can't get out.
Can't get out.
Okay. Okay.
May I step out of, is there any other, I have one other suggestion on the ramp. You know the Madison Building?
I'm sorry, I do
Madison
not.
Building just had a major renovation.
Next
It's-
door almost.
It's,
Okay.
yeah, and Glenridge Avenue actually slopes down pretty aggressively from Bloomfield Avenue. There's one entrance to the Madison Building. It's a 4 or 5 story building. Was a big stationery store, and then it was divided up just recently, major renovation. They have one at-grade entrance on Bloomfield Avenue. Their second means of egress for that big building only can be on Glen Ridge Avenue. And I'm looking at the photo right now. Glen Ridge Avenue, there's quite a steep drop, and somehow the Madison Building was able to make that second means of egress onto Glen Ridge Avenue with no incursion into the public space. So maybe you could talk to them and see how they did it. So that's an example that's literally probably a couple hundred feet away, where they were able to accommodate it.
Yep. Interesting.
Good pickup.
Are there other questions from the public for this witness?
So before I talk to Mr. Neese, it's getting late. Before we excuse Mr. Manning, maybe we'll adjourn, because I have another witness after him, the planner. Adjourn, let him go back, look at this interest issue, which obviously is of interest to the board, and come back at the next meeting and finish up with that, as well as the planning testimony.
When would the next meeting be, Ms. Talley, that we can bring them in?
I could put them on for July 8th. It'd be a very busy meeting. Or we skip to July 22nd.
We've got some commitments to the tenant that we're negotiating with, so.
Oh, those are the 2 dates. You let me know. Do
Okay.
both dates work for you?
I'll have to go back and talk to the team and see.
Well,
Oh, we have to do it now, right?
We either need to know
All right,
now or
so-
you have to renotice. Not if you don't put it on the record, Mr. Schwartz.
July
The next
8th, if
meeting.
that's possible. July 8th?
So how many applications do we have on for the 8th, and where are they on the list?
Well, I'll put them first, or actually, I'll give you July 8th. 59 have registered.
Do we have other business?
Voters coming back. So you'll be the third old business item, okay? Just Schilling Joe. I then have 3 new applications. I don't think we're
So you'll be number 3 on old business, and you're taking your chances a little bit.
Yeah.
Take them in order.
I already told you that.
Understand. So you're okay with that?
Yeah, we'll go for that.
Okay, so you're going to come back on July 8th. We'll continue the architect's testimony, and you'll have the planner's testimony at that time? Okay.
Okay.
Doing anything else, Mr. Neese, on that? Great. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Okay. Next up, we have, under our committee reports, we have a report from the zoning subcommittee for proposed amendments to Chapter 347 zoning and Chapter 202 land use procedures.
Yeah, I know I have it. I have to find it. It's my little committee. I can't even find my, I had it.
Okay, many of these changes are included in the comprehensive rewrite of our zoning code last year. We've decided to take a baby step approach and start off with the most important ones and at the beginning, which is why we redid the definitions. So what I did was I broke it into 2 different ordinances because we're addressing 2 different codes. One is land use procedures, and really the way this is written is just to add additional items to our checklist to address sustainability issues, to require developers to provide the information so that the board and the Environmental Commission can review applications as to how they address sustainability issues.
Ms. Janice, it wasn't just sustainability. Remember, there's like, they have to do pedestrian mobility plan, and they have to do...
Carmela, that's
Oh, okay, getting there? Okay.
That was where I was heading. I said, in addition to that,
Sorry.
we've added items. If you look at 31, 32, 33, you added a master signage plan, which is technically not a checklist item. An affordable housing unit plan. In fact, I went to an affordable housing conference last week on best practices, and I want to take item 32 and just add a couple of bullet points after that, specific items that need to be included in an affordable housing plan. So I don't think that would be a substantive change, but it's just going to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okay.
A rooftop equipment plan, a pedestrian mobility plan, and a snow removal plan. So again, it's to be proactive in terms of reviewing these applications. The other change, which is is to the zoning ordinance, and we spent a lot of time with the subcommittee, which was Carmel and Tony and Carol and Bill Harrison from the zoning board, as well as Graham, and we worked with the zoning officer as well to clean up our ordinance. And we started with all ordinances start with definitions. So a lot of these definitions were things that are long overdue. They're changes for consistency, and they're changes to set up additional changes to the plan. So after the definition section, there is an ongoing issue with accessory buildings. This came from the zoning board. I don't believe it was in their report to the planning board, because a lot of our changes here address the zoning report to the planning board. But there have been a couple of issues with recent applications where very large accessory structures are being permitted because they're located very close to the principal structure, and an accessory structure has setback requirements of only 5 feet or 6 feet from the side property line. Whereas what we're seeing is that accessory structures that are very large, that are being put at that 6-foot setback, is really an imposing structure on the lot.
Like a large pool house?
Yeah.
Exactly, like a large pool house. So what this ordinance is intended to do is put a distance requirement between an accessory structure and the principal structure, and we added some additional requirements to basically reduce the size of some of those accessory structures. That's where G came. A maximum of 2 accessory buildings are permitted per lot, excluding 1 accessory building less than 100 square feet in the area. Okay. We added a new section on, or expanded section on rooftop mechanical equipment. Right now, we just require that it be screened. This is a new section, again, to address concerns with rooftop equipment that's oversized. So it requires screening, setbacks, location. We're basically calling where on a rooftop, when you have rooftop mechanical equipment, we're calling that a penthouse. So a penthouse structure, and it requires all mechanical equipment to be located within what's called this penthouse. We do allow separate structures for bulkhead penthouses. We do not allow habitable penthouses. We've seen a lot of proposals for habitable penthouses, and we're trying to keep the size of those structures down, where you can have, according to this, you can have open space on your rooftop. Courtyards, we've seen those. We really don't want to have structures on the rooftop.
That is an important point, because once it's occupiable,
It's a story.
It's a story.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
the quick fix of it.
We and the rest of these regulations are really cleaning up some of the wording that we started with last year's ordinance. Items 6, 7, and 8 have to do with front yard setbacks in the RO, ROA, and R1 zone. What we're trying to do is take out the definition of how average front yard setback is measured. We put that in the definition section. We're deleting it from every zoning section, but we are adding new requirements for how you treat garages.
Which zones are those again?
RO, ROA, and R1, because we've had an issue with applicants putting parking in front of building line, and we're trying to ensure that the parking and the garages are behind the building line, they're not protruding, and that's essentially what these sections apply to. I can clarify that 6 is for the RO, 7 is the ROA, and 8 is the language for the R1 zone.
Janice, it wasn't
Yes.
it wasn't RO2 as well? R2 as well?
I don't know, I think R2 just referenced to R1.
Oh.
So I didn't have to make that change. I'm working within the antiquated language in our current code. And then finally, item 9, as you recall, originally we tried to reduce the height in the C1 zone from 6 stories to 4 stories. That was met with, from the council, was not supported. So what we're trying to do is tighten up the parking requirements, because parking is really the limiting factor. And it's a very simple change. Right now, we allow parking to be provided on an off-site, on a different property. This just requires all parking to be provided on-site. That's 9 and 10, essentially addresses that. So those are all the changes we have right now. I'm working on additional changes, and the zoning subcommittee will be meeting again with new issues that have come. I haven't talked to you guys about that, but again, these things keep coming up. What I want to do is get the planning board's endorsement of these changes so I can send it to the Economic Development Committee at the next meeting in July, and then get it on the agenda for council and approval.
I mean, I like the changes. I think you guys have done a tremendous job, and I could
Janice
see.
she brought cookies.
That's how she enticed you to really work hard on this, cookies?
I think
like
Another
it.
overtime pay, right?
I think William Harris.
You got
is
double
a
your
very-
usual rate, right?
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I thought these were really nicely done and well put together, so thank you for spending a lot of time on it. It's always had a couple of questions. For fitness center, I noticed you used the word karate. I thought we should maybe just say martial arts, so it covers like jiu-jitsu studios and taekwondo and all the different. Yeah, if you get into MMA,
Is that
MMA,
fitness?
it's under fitness center.
Okay.
And then I had a question, moving down to penthouse structures, penthouse, definition of penthouse. Gooseneck exhaust ducts, is that the standard exhaust duct that's got a fan in it and it just kind of looks like almost like a cone or a bowl?
Well, the fan is on the side, but what it's doing is when you have to blow it up over the building.
Okay.
Because it's going to be 10 feet away from any window.
So this is like the rooftop thing?
Yeah,
this is under penthouse.
It's on page 5, the
You have to
definition
put
of
that in the
penthouse.
Well, sometimes you have to blow it up.
I don't think you'd have to put that in the penthouse, right? Just an
No.
exhaust fan?
It's excluded.
That's excluded, okay.
Included, yeah. Along with a, like normal plumbing vents and other
Right.
stuff small stuff, right? That can pop up anyway.
Right, those are excluded, because those really need to be
I
exposed
see what
to the
that's
air.
saying, is that, okay. I read that wrong. Do we need to exclude air intakes too? I'm just thinking back to the recent application we had with Choi.
Air intake.
He had a makeup air.
Yeah, he needed makeup air for his kitchen.
He had an exhaust duct, and then you needed makeup air. 'cause you're
That's not a
pulling too
vent
much
stack?
out. Yeah.
I don't know if that's a plumbing vent stack. To me,
No,
plumbing
it's not
vent
a
stack
plumbing
is your, the sewer, toilet, all that stuff.
Should you say something?
So-
Or similar equipment? Is that a catch-all?
I don't know if that leaves it too loose. I
don't know.
I think it's probably safer just to be silent on it. I don't think we need to define everything.
Okay.
And that's just one small situation, an intake stack.
Just it came to mind that just recently discussed that. And then, where was I? On, what page is this? Page 8? Where in B, number 1, again, this is rooftop mechanical equipment. When it was reading all rooftop mechanical equipment other than skylights, goosenecks, exhaust, all that other thing shall be enclosed in a penthouse, and maybe this is because I read it wrong originally, will that cause more, say, vents in the side of the building? Like if you have this enclosed penthouse, you're going to have a lot of like metal slats on the side for air intakes? But I may have read that wrong because I thought all of those other items were included in the penthouse.
It says except, other than, So they don't need to be in the penthouse.
Okay.
Those exhaust pipes.
I think I misread it.
Right.
This stems from the situation we're facing now with the MC Hotel, whereby they claim they've always added these elements on after the fact, and there's never been an issue. And now we're facing effectively, an 8-foot high structure
Right.
where it was never encapsulated. And, when we're looking at that, where the image we approved was a nice clean
Right.
top, be it effectively 9 stories. Now, there's another story.
This
So-
ordinance clearly says no equipment on top of a penthouse.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. No, I mean, I think it certainly
Yeah.
addresses that,
So
that
that-
issue. I was just trying to think through,
Yeah.
and clearly, like I said, I think I read that part wrong. I thought we were trying to say all of those vents and everything had to be in a penthouse. Yeah, I missed that part of it. And then my only other question was, the attached garages kind of in front of the building line? I know at one point I think the new zoning grandfathered in lot widths that weren't conforming. Is that something we want to do with the garages as well, or?
No.
No? Okay.
I don't want to make that argument. It's a real struggle getting applicants to push the garages back, and I think that's one of it's a defining character of most of the houses in Montclair, that the garage is not the prevalent feature. We spend
Gotcha.
a lot of time pushing back on that.
Perfect. That's all I needed to know. Those are my comments. Any other comments?
Everybody wants to have garage forward, yes.
Closer to a detached garage, closer to the house.
Yeah, and then parking in the front of the building, so. That way you get more living space in the back.
Yeah, you should see the cars from the street, so they don't have to see the car in the back.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Or hit it when they throw a ball.
All right. So, can I have a motion from the board in support of the changes to the land use procedures and the zoning?
So moved.
I don't think we should do it. Thank you, Carla. I was just sitting quietly. I don't think we should do it.
Be proud of your work. You can go for it.
Steve, was that a second?
That's a second.
Okay.
With a caveat reserving the right to amend at a later date, depending on crafting modifications after the EDC and/or your office
Okay.
plays with this further.
I think what you're saying, Martin, is you want this, once it's introduced by the council, you want it to come back to the planning
I
board.
was saying it's going to come back to us anyways,
It
isn't it?
doesn't have to.
Oh, it doesn't have to?
No, if it comes from the
Yeah.
planning board, it doesn't have to come back to you. Normally, it doesn't. You've sent your ordinance to the council, and if you want it to come back, then
So again, with the caveat that we either see it again or have the right to further amend or comment prior to council review or passage, one of the two.
okay. And I will let you. Okay, and I will let you know when the council. Keep you informed of when the council has public hearings on this. So if anybody wants to come to the meeting and say support, we want this, that would be wonderful. Anyway, so I've got a motion and a second with that caveat. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
Question before bills. What's the status of the MC residences that went before the zoning board, or is supposed to go before the zoning board?
It's going, yeah,
Has it gone yet or no?
they've submitted an application. I don't know the date of the hearing, but I do know that it's pending before the zoning
So it
board.
hasn't been heard yet?
No, it's just it's pending before the zoning board. It's an interpretation, not an interpretation of an appeal of an administrative decision, I
Right.
believe. Yeah.
So they have to decide on how many, on the density based on the ordinance?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay.
This is a hotel?
No,
No.
it's a 4-story building next to the hotel, next to the parking.
Ferraris.
Ferraris property?
Yeah.
The best little old body shop is now gone.
Well,
very
Will
best.
the MC residents ever come here?
Yeah,
After they-
well, I would assume, I gotta wait, I'm gonna table that
Okay.
until I hear what the
Answer?
decision of the zoning board is. I mean, it could always come back here, because I don't think it's a redevelopment plan. The zoning board can't hear it, they can't grant a use variance, so I would assume it has to come
So
back
the
here.
issue, the issue remains the interpretation of the drafted
Right,
part of the plan.
right.
How many units per acre are allowed?
How, yes, exactly, that's exactly it.
Density, the density.
That's the issue.
That's the remaining issue based on interpretation
Right.
of the draft. Okay, got it.
Okay, I have a question. So what's going on with Black Plaza suit? Who defends us?
We're not discussing that.
Oh, we're not?
We haven't been served.
Yes.
You haven't been served. I have a meeting set, I'm scheduling a meeting with the township, because it's been, mentioned in the suit is the planning board and the township. So I'm setting up a meeting with Dennis Galvin and Ira Karasik to figure out the next steps, but.
If we need to discuss it, we can discuss it in executive session. We'll just have to
Yeah.
put it on the agenda ahead of time.
Right.
I'd like to have a quick discussion on that.
I'm putting it putting it on the agenda, or you want it put on the agenda at the next meeting?
Yes, I think it would be good to put it on the agenda for next meeting, for a quick executive session discussion.
For tonight?
No, not, well, didn't we had to?
Were we served?
No.
No.
I think we should find out where we are before we.
Yeah, I-
It's,
I mean, if you're saying put it on the agenda for July 8th, then that's one thing, although there's
I
six
think we could wait till
applications on.
July 22nd.
I think we could
July
probably
8th is
wait.
Until we know
packed.
what the,
Yeah, exactly. We don't have much to say. I
But
don't, you haven't
it
been
involves spending money, and once we're served, there's a 30-day response.
35.
35. So let's assume we're going to be served within the next day or so, since the council was already served?
No, nobody was served.
Nobody's served yet. Okay, so, but what I'm saying is, an executive session in 30 days could be too late to...
All right, we'll just put it on the calendar for the 8th, and we'll see where we are. I can't tell you anything more than that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Can I ask just a general question? When the town or the planning board is sued, is it typically that we would hire outside counsel, or the counsel that represented us at the time of that's who you'd hire?
Typically, it's our council working with the township's council, so that you're not duplicating work. Am I correct?
You are. In fact, Jonathan Goulden was the attorney who represented Dick Grabowski when this board and the township got sued in connection with the Kensington project.
Yeah.
Thought I'd just remind you of that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Mr. Neese, you represented us
I did.
alongside Mr. Karasik, I guess? Or somehow split that?
Actually, Mr. Karasik hired outside counsel, Genova Burns, to represent.
Because
the
he had a conflict.
Gotcha.
With Mr.
Oh.
Grabowski.
But you typically would not hire outside counsel.
You wouldn't. That's why you have the attorneys here.
Attorneys have different skill sets. Some are good at litigation, and some are good at planning board stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Galvin's good at it all.
I think he'll be fine. Between him and I think we're well covered. Okay. So I need a motion to pay the bills.
So moved.
Second, Carol? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Scott, for sticking around.